Chapter 449. 2 hours later, Renbachien and Lin Xiaola sat by the fire. Renbachien held a stick in his hand and roasted the Jeshue's head over the fire. Lin Xiaola was in charge of drooling, which flowed down her chin, neck, collarbone, and onto the plains. Her eyes were dull and drooling, and she looked exactly like a mentally disabled child. But every time the eyes on the head began to move, she would slap them and return to her previous appearance as a mentally disabled child. The old man sat not far away, and a sense of sorrow rose from the bottom of his heart. This mentally disabled little girl had scratched his face. Beside him was Zhang Kaixin. She sat on the steps with one hand supporting her chin as she looked at the beast's head being roasted over the fire. Why isn't this thing cooked yet? Renbachien felt that his hands were sore. He had been roasting it for more than an hour, but there were no signs of it being cooked. If it were that simple, why would I have suppressed it here for decades? You can forget about roasting it in this lifetime. The old man heard Renbachien's doubts and immediately raised his head, looking like an expert giving advice. What should I do then? Renbachien asked shamelessly. If it were alive, you wouldn't be able to do anything. However, it died a long time ago and isn't completely dead yet. Just soak it in the juice of the three-way flour for 3 days and start a fire with phoenix wood to roast it, the old man pointed out. How about eating it raw? Renbachien thought about it and felt that it was too troublesome, so he turned his head and asked Lin Xiaola. Lin Xiaola pursed her lips. On the one hand, she felt that this thing tasted better when it was cooked, but on the other hand, she didn't want to wait too long. She had a strong appetite when she saw this thing. If she had to wait for another day, her saliva would flood the village, let alone 3 days. Village Chief Grandpa, do you have the three-way flour and phoenix wood here? Zhang Kaixin asked the old man. How can you find them here? These things can only be found in the 60,000 mountains. Even in the 60,000 mountains, I'm afraid that you won't be able to find them without 2 to 3 years. Furthermore, you won't be able to chew them raw. Back then, even my master had to expend a lot of effort to kill this thing. The old man shook his head. After hearing this, Lin Xiaola didn't hesitate any longer. She immediately took the Jeshua head out of the fire and began to gnaw on it. It made a crunching sound as if she was gnawing on wood, and Renbachien felt his teeth ache just from hearing it. Roar! Another furious roar appeared in everyone's mind. It was as if Jeshua's head was letting out an unwilling roar. Lin Xiaola gave it a backhand slap and continued to chew. With a smile on his face, the old man calmly looked at Lin Xiaola gnawing on the fruit, as if he could already foresee the result of her failure. No matter what, he had finally vented his frustrations. Then, everyone watched helplessly as Lin Xiaola bit off a piece of skin from Jeshua's head. Hiss, how is that possible? The old man's eyes widened. He had heard about this world puppet from his master. It was said that it was impervious to swords and spears, impervious to fire and water, and difficult to injure with great strength. Even his master had spent a great deal of effort to kill this Jeshua. Even after so many years, he couldn't do anything to Jeshua's head. His Qingyun sword could be considered a treasure sword that could cut through iron as if it were mud, and it only produced sparks when he slashed at it. However, this little girl could actually bite it? Her teeth were sharper than the Qingyun sword? Then, the old man's gaze suddenly became sharp as he stared at Lin Xiaola. Renbachien immediately became vigilant. Sure enough, she isn't a human. I initially thought that she had practiced some special martial arts, but it turns out that she isn't a human, the old man said coldly after looking at her for a while. What do you mean? Renbachien's heart skipped a beat when he saw his expression. Don't play dumb, the old man said coldly. Then he stared at Lin Xiaola for a while before sighing and saying, Forget it, I can't care about this anymore. What do you mean, senior? I really don't know, Renbachien said as he thought that he might be able to find out about Lin Xiaola's origin from this old man. It's useless to say more. Good luck. The old man didn't want to talk about this matter anymore. Although he didn't speak anymore, his expression became much colder. Renbachien knew that the old man definitely knew something. Seeing that the old man wasn't willing to say more, Renbachien frowned and wondered how he could get more information out of the old man. In fact, The old village chief didn't know much. Back then, his master had just broken through to the spirit will level and went to the 60,000 mountains, but he returned with serious injuries. Before he died, he said that those who weren't stronger than him shouldn't go to the depths of the 60,000 mountains and should be careful of those who looked like humans but weren't. Previously, he didn't understand why, but now that he saw Lin Xiaola, he suddenly remembered his master's words. This was related to the truth of his master's death, so he naturally wanted to know more. However, the battle with the Aboriginals was imminent, so he forcibly suppressed his thoughts. He had also made up his mind that after this battle, he would capture this woman no matter what price he had to pay and interrogate her about what was hidden in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. After the old man calmed down, he raised his head and asked Rinpoche, "Tell me your purpose for coming here." Rinpoche repeated what he had said at the Golden Ring residence. "I have 3 requests. First, you have to strengthen your attacks and attract the attention of the Aboriginals. Secondly, they didn't have enough weapons. Thirdly, she has to follow us." The old man pointed at Lin Xiaola and said, "Shi Wanya isn't easy to deal with. Experts of the same level aren't his match in a one-on-one fight. Her skills are pretty good, and if she makes a move, she will be able to delay Shi Wanya for some time. We can then surround and kill the other 2 Cardinal Heaven experts in the army. I can promise you the first and third requests, but the second one is a little troublesome. It's not easy to transport weapons from the Yun Nation, and now we're at war. It won't be easy to transport a large number of weapons over. It will consume a lot of manpower and resources, and it will be easier to be discovered," Rinpoche said after pondering for a while. "That's your problem. After all, if you guys were to go against the ancient race alone, I'm afraid you wouldn't be able to hold on for long. If you want us to risk our lives, you have to show us something," the old man said coldly. Rinpoche retorted, "Great Xiao is here too, right? I wonder where he is? What conditions did he promise you? Also, without us, you guys won't be able to do anything. We can totally wait for them to attack Wangjing and delay the line of soldiers before making a move. The pressure we have to face is almost the same as if we were to make a move now," the old man said. "As for the Great Xia people, that's between us and them. The Aboriginals are training new soldiers," Rinpoche reminded him. "Their target is definitely you guys. All right, I promise you that I will find a way to transport the weapons over within 3 months. You guys must make a move after 3 months," Rinpoche said after pondering for a while. In fact, none of these 3 conditions could be fulfilled. However, they had to put on a good act. "That's settled then. There are empty houses in the village. You guys can stay there for the night." The old man threw these words and returned to his room. At night, Rinpoche and Lin Xiaola sat in an empty room. Lin Xiaola was still gnawing on the Jiesu's head. When there was no one around, she suddenly looked up and said, "Should I go and kill him? He's hostile." "Continue gnawing on your Jiesu first. Now isn't the time yet." Rinpoche waved his hand and looked at Lin Xiaola, who continued to gnaw on the Jiesu's head. Looking at the old man's big reaction, this guy in front of him had a lot of secrets. There were also a lot of secrets in this world. The thing in the belly of Mount Lyotsue, the unknown location of the Sword Mountain, the mystery of the disappearance of the previous 2 emperors, and now the origin of Lin Xiaola. Chapter 450. Early in the morning, Rinpoche stood at the entrance of the village and looked into the distance. A few youngsters were practicing martial arts there. Some of them were practicing swordsmanship and fists. These were the disciples of the elders in the village. After all, those elders were active experts 70 years ago. Many of their lifespans were nearing the end of their lifespans. In order not to bring all their knowledge to the earth, they tried to find a successor to pass on their legacy. Rinpoche watched from the side for a long time. The martial arts of these youngsters were very different from the Fist of Death that he had learned. Compared to their martial arts, the Fist of Death was more direct, more open, and more suitable for killing on the battlefield. It also fully displayed the strength of the Aboriginals. On the other hand, their martial arts were completely based on the martial arts of Jianghu. They were more inclined to maneuver in a small area, fight one-on-one, and use more feints. Another important point was that their moves looked good. At least, they looked very elegant when they moved. Unlike the Fist of Death, which only had Black Tiger Steals the Heart, it didn't look as good as their martial arts. When used by the Aboriginals, the Fist of Death was completely overpowered and powerful. However, Rinpoche didn't have the strength of the Aboriginals, so the power of the Fist of Death was much weaker. Rinpoche felt that if he were to fight against these youngsters, he might not be their match. At the thought of this, Rinpoche felt even more miserable. Not only could he not defeat a 10-year-old Lolita, but he might not even be able to defeat a random cat or dog. How could he endure this? On the contrary, the set of boxing techniques that the Empress taught him was the most suitable for him. It had a strange style and was completely aimed at killing people. Many of the moves were imitations of the movements of beasts pouncing on human experts. This set of boxing techniques was completely used to hunt people. It was a pity that the movements of this set of boxing techniques were too difficult. Many of the movements were very strange and didn't conform to human bone structure and strength. At that time, he saw the Empress execute it smoothly, but when it was his turn, he simply couldn't execute many of the movements, let alone practice it. Up until now, he still couldn't execute all the movements and still focused on practicing the Fist of Death. Brother Lin, this move of yours is wrong. You have to move it downwards by 30%. Sister Hua, this move of yours is missing 2 sword flowers. You have to exert more strength on your wrist. A clear and melodious voice sounded. The little girl, Zhang Kaixian, ran back and forth to help everyone give pointers on the moves. It was hard to believe that Zhang Kaixian, this little girl, was actually better than these people in terms of martial skills. These elders liked Zhang Kaixian's character very much. When she came last time, many elders passed on a few cultivation techniques to her. Her innate talent was also pretty good, and there were many areas where she practiced better than the disciples of these elders. After staying here for 2 days, she was sent by those elders to correct the mistakes of these disciples in their moves. If it was someone else doing this, they would definitely be hated by others. I practice every day, and you only learned a little. Yet you're actually better than me. How can I not be angry? However, Zhang Kaixian's innocent and romantic personality made people unable to hate her even if they wanted to. Rinpoche stood at the side for a long time. He wanted to give it a try. After all, he had never fought with someone who was at the same level as him, and he didn't know what level he was at. However, when he thought about the 2 sets of fist techniques he could use, he could only give up on this idea. The killing fist was too obvious. He couldn't use the fist techniques of the Aboriginals at all. The other one was the tortoise fist. After thinking about it, he gave up on this idea. After eating breakfast, Rinpoche was ready to leave. He still had to go down the mountain to inform the Yun nation to transport the weapons over and prepare to look at the other cities. When Rinpoche found the old village chief's house, more than 20 elders were actually sitting in the courtyard. There's no need to say anything. If we kill her, they will definitely be in chaos. Even if there will be a cleansing and revenge, how can there be no deaths in war? The tall, white-haired elder that Rinpoche saw before said. His white hair fluttered even though there was no wind, and he looked imposing. Over the past 2 days, Rinpoche had also learned the name of this elder. He was called the Celestial Hound. It was said that once he set his sights on someone, he would bite them like a dog and not let go. Furthermore, he had a bad temper and even dared to roar at the heavens. That was why he had such a name. However, most people didn't dare to say this in front of him. Otherwise, he would not rest until one of them died. The old dog's words are correct, another elder said as he knocked on the bamboo cane in his hand. This is a good opportunity. Don't hesitate, another elder said. Shi Wanyo will definitely take revenge, and I don't know how many people will die. That's a matter for the future. Just like what the old dog said, how can there be no deaths in war? We can't miss this opportunity. Contact all the experts at the Earth Wheel level and above. No matter how powerful she is, she's just one person. I don't believe that the entire Tianjin Basin can't kill her alone. Rinpoche walked to the door and stopped. Everyone's conversation was heard by him. Who were they trying to kill? From what they said, it should be the higher-ups of the Aboriginals. Otherwise, they wouldn't have involved Shiwanya and said things like crazy revenge. The person they wanted to kill was also very powerful, to the extent that it was boundlessly powerful. They needed to gather all the experts in Tianjing Basin to besiege and kill her. At this thought, Rinpoche was stunned. There was no need to think about it. Besides the Empress, there was no one else who met these conditions. But what was the situation now? Was the Empress in Gu City or somewhere else? Both of you come in, the old village chief, Qingyun Sword, said in a clear voice. Rinpoche calmed himself down and said, I see that everyone is discussing something. I don't know if I'm disturbing you. Come in and talk, Qingyun Sword said. Rinpoche and Lin Xiaola stood at one side. Lin Xiaola was still holding the Jieshue's head, which was almost half the size of her body. After 2.5 days, she had gnawed more than half of it. What was visible was the purplish-red shriveled flesh and white bones. It looked very horrifying. There's a piece of news that has just arrived. It's very important to us and to all of you. You need to take action too, Qingyun Sword said after glancing at Lin Xiaola. Please. Rinpoche cupped his hands, but his heart tightened. Qi Zixiao appeared alone in Tianjing Basin. How can that be? Although Rinpoche was already prepared, he still couldn't help but be surprised after hearing what the other party said. Why would the Empress appear alone in Tianjing Basin? What was she doing here? Qingyun Sword felt that Rinpoche's reaction was very normal. He was also surprised when he heard this news. After all, the Empress of Dayou actually came to Tianjing Basin alone. It was indeed puzzling. Of course, she wasn't alone. There were 2 maids by her side, but in everyone's eyes, she was alone. Rinpoche already knew their plan, but he still asked subconsciously, You guys are preparing to? That's right. Gather all the experts and besiege her. Therefore, we need all of you to contribute, Qingyun Sword said in a deep voice as he looked at Lin Xiaola. His target was Lin Xiaola. As for Rinpoche, it wasn't that he looked down on him, but he was really a piece of trash in terms of martial arts. That's how it should be. Seeing that Qingyun Sword had made his decision, the celestial hound immediately slapped its thigh and laughed heartily. Even if I die there, it will be worth it. Besieging and killing the 5th most powerful expert in the world and the Empress of Dayou was a big deal. Chapter 451. Everyone discussed for a long time before returning to their residences. In less than an hour, 7 or 8 elders left the hidden village with lofty sentiments. Needless to say, they were calling their friends and inviting people to come out of the mountains. Those who were personally sought out by this group of old fellows were definitely not ordinary people. These old fellows went out to look for experts who lived in seclusion. In addition to those experts who lived in seclusion, there were also the 3 major powers and various large and small sections. Those who participated in this siege were all experts at the Earthwheel level and above in Tianjing Basin. If it weren't for the inconvenience of mobilizing so many experts and the fact that the Empress's whereabouts weren't fixed, they would have arranged for a large number of ordinary elite soldiers and man-wheel experts to wear down the Empress's strength. Under the circumstances where the Empress's whereabouts were uncertain, only experts could reach the destination in the shortest time possible. Something big has happened. This was the only thought in Rinpoche's mind. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? Originally, Rinpoche wanted to get some weapons to stabilize them and enter their ranks to understand their entire plan. When the time came, he could make targeted arrangements and eliminate all of them in one fell swoop. However, all his plans had been disrupted. Why did the Empress come to Tianjing Basin? She didn't bring any guards and only brought Qin Yuan and Hong Luan. The Empress wasn't a god. Although she was very powerful in Rinpoche's eyes, even the 5th most powerful expert in the world wouldn't be able to escape if she was surrounded by hundreds of Earthwheel experts and more than 10 Spirit Wheel experts. After all, ants could kill an elephant if there were too many of them. The boss had to be defeated by a group of people. What should he do next? The best way was naturally to find the Empress and leave Tianjing Basin. However, it wasn't easy to find the Empress in Tianjing Basin. Even in a city, he would brush past her, not to mention that he only knew the approximate area. Finding the Empress was like looking for a needle in a haystack. so it was better to follow the main force. Then what? The Empress and Lin Xiaola, along with him, Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, who were burdens, faced countless experts. No matter how he thought about it, there wasn't much of a chance of victory. As for himself, he really couldn't help much. 4 earth wheel experts, conventional weapons weren't of much use, let alone spirit wheel experts. Nuclear bombs? Let's not talk about whether or not they could obtain those things. Even if they could, they would perish together. Poisonous gas? It seemed feasible. However, after thinking about it, he was an outsider and surrounded by experts. If he took out a bunch of bottles, it would definitely arouse suspicion. When that happened, he would be slapped to death. Furthermore, the speed at which the poison spread was too slow. Those experts were fast and had strong resistance to poison, so it was impossible for them to poison more than a few people. Using poison had the same problem as using nuclear bombs, which was that it was not easy to get their hands on such weapons of mass destruction. Apart from these, he could not think of any other method that would be useful in such a case. In this situation, there were not many weapons on Earth that could be of use. His last resort was to bring everyone back to Earth and hide for 5 days. He would wait for the Empress to kill a batch of them first. At the crucial moment, he would bring everyone back to Earth to recuperate for a few days before returning. However, it wasn't easy to grasp the timing. With so many experts fighting, the situation could change in an instant. He had to bring along the Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Wan, and Lin Xiaola. One could well imagine the difficulty of this task. Forget it. Presumably, there was still some time before they could gather enough people to reach the target area. He would think about other methods during this period of time. Ren Baqian felt a headache coming on. He simply wanted to sigh. Your Majesty, didn't you stay in Gu City? Even if you wanted to come to Tianjing Basin, you should have brought more people with you. Ren Baqian turned his head and saw that Lin Xiaola was still gnawing on her lion head. It has been more than 2 days. Don't your cheeks hurt? However, Ren Baqian felt that her face was a little too big. Could this be the legendary gills? Lin Xiaola scratched people's faces for no reason. Ren Baqian really suspected that she was related to cats. If she was really a cat girl, then it would be logical for her to be tanned. When she was done gnawing, he would be able to see her bun-like face. They want to kill Her Majesty. Don't you have anything to say? Ren Baqian looked at her happily gnawing and couldn't help but ask. What? Lin Xiaola looked up in a daze. They want to kill Her Majesty. But. Lin Xiaola's reaction was almost a replica of who she was, where she was, and what she was doing. Nothing, you can continue gnawing. Ren Baqian covered his head. That afternoon, Ren Baqian returned to Earth. At night, when the moon rose, the figure of the old village chief, Qing Yun's sword, appeared outside the courtyard. Is Mr. Yi in? Lin Xiaola gnawed on the lion head while speaking vaguely. Where did Mr. Yi go? Qing Yun's sword was a little puzzled. He should be in the room at this time. Lin Xiaola put down the lion head and tilted her head to think for a long time. In the past, Ren Baqian had told her how to deal with such a situation. What did he say again? After thinking for a long time, Lin Xiaola finally remembered something. Her voice was full of dissatisfaction and anger as she said, What time is it now? Do you have any civility to disturb me at such a late hour? Wait for me to go out and beat you to death. The last word, was extremely charming and full of twists and turns. In addition, when she was gnawing on the lion head, she mumbled something. Qing Yun's sword's thoughts immediately went astray. I'm sorry, Mr. Yi. Come to my room tomorrow when you wake up, Qing Yun's sword said, flicked his sleeves, and left quickly. After walking for more than 100 meters, Qing Yun's sword looked up at the sky as if he was looking at his lost youth. The next morning, Ren Baqian came back with an arrow on his back. He was thinking that with so many people around, the Empress might not be able to see him. If he played pomp and circumstance, his voice would be very recognizable. Needless to say, the Empress would know where he was. In addition, there was a pile of fortified smoke bombs. The main thing was that he didn't know what to bring. After thinking about it, he thought that this thing might come in handy, so he prepared some first. When he came back, He looked at Lin Xiaola and felt that her face seemed to have grown a little bigger. Soon after, he opened the door, sat in front of the room, and tuned the strings. Then he played Pomp and Circumstance. After a series of short notes, the moans of the eru reached everyone's ears. "Damn it, what's that sound?" Xiao Tianquan, who was wiping his weapon in the room, cursed. "Why does this sound so weird? Who's playing this instrument? I want to slap him to death." A series of curses sounded within the range of Rinpoche's eru. However, there was still someone squatting in front of Rinpoche, holding her face with both hands and listening attentively. After Rinpoche finished playing Pomp and Circumstance, he immediately felt refreshed. "Sure enough, I'm an eru player who was held back by my studies. What's this? It's very nice." Zhang Kaixian squatted at the entrance of Rinpoche's courtyard and said. Rinpoche's spirits immediately rose. Thinking about how his eru was suppressed in front of the palace, Rinpoche always felt heartache. Now he finally had a soulmate. "Can you teach me?" Zhang Kaixian asked again. "Sure." Rinpoche nodded and agreed without hesitation. Rinpoche now felt that this little girl in front of him was becoming more and more pleasing to the eye. A soulmate was hard to find. Chapter 452. There were more than 10 households in Pingfeng Valley. Smoke rose from the chimneys at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. An old woman with a walking stick and a young girl stood at the entrance of the valley for a long time before slowly walking down. "Master, is the person who lives here very powerful?" The young girl wanted to help the old woman, but she was stopped by the old woman. "It's fine at home, but don't do this outside." "I'm not so old that I can't walk," the old woman replied. Then, he answered, "If it weren't for the continuous battles that damaged his foundation, I'm afraid he would have already attained the spirit will level. With his talent, how could he be stuck at the earth will level without any progress?" As he spoke, he seemed to see that shy youth who always carried a paper umbrella on his back and had dimples when he smiled. At that time, she was around 20 years old and was in her prime. Unfortunately, fate made fools of people. So powerful. The young girl stuck out her tongue. There were only 13 spirit wheel experts in the entire Tianjin basin. This person must have been a famous person back then. The old woman walked very slowly as if she was admiring the scenery on both sides and adjusting her mood. Following a small path, they walked for a full hour before they reached the entrance of the village. When the children saw strangers, they looked at them curiously before dispersing. Only a naked boy with a ponytail and a runny nose was left. He ran up to the two of them, wiped his nose with his dirty fingers and asked, "Who are you looking for?" "Who are you looking for? Does Chang'an live here?" the old woman asked with a smile. "There's no such person," the child replied after thinking for a while. The old woman nodded and walked forward. "I already said that there's no such person. What else do you want?" the child asked curiously as he followed the two of them. He raised his hand and wanted to grab the young girl's clothes. The material of the clothes wasn't what the villagers wore, but he hesitated. When the young girl saw his actions, she quickly moved to the other side of the old woman. If she was grabbed by his runny hand, she would lose her clothes. "As long as he's not dead, he's here. Even if he's dead, I want to see his grave." The old woman replied first, then turned to the young girl beside her and asked, "Are you going to sell me out so quickly?" "Master, I was wrong." The young girl quickly lowered her head and turned to the other side of the old woman. A hand covered in snot suddenly grabbed the hem of her skirt, causing her face to twitch. She looked like she was about to cry. "So soft." The child touched the skirt enviously, then quickly ran into the village. "Run, Grandpa. An old monster is coming to take you away." The old woman's firm footsteps suddenly came to a halt, and a sullen expression appeared on her face. However, it quickly dissipated and was replaced by a light and joyful feeling in his heart. He was indeed still here. A moment later, she stopped in front of a door and saw an old man sitting in the courtyard, pasting paper on an umbrella. The old man looked to be in his 60s. His white hair was combed behind his head. He was concentrating on the work at hand. When he finished, he put the umbrella aside and looked up at the old woman with a smile. Long time no see. Dozens of years, countless thoughts, and in the end, it all turned into a single sentence, long time no see. You've broken through? The old woman's face lit up with joy. Yes, I originally wanted to repair my foundation, but no matter how much effort I put in, it was all in vain. Eventually, I gave up and worked here every day to feel everything around me. I didn't expect to break through. Life is still unpredictable, Chang Tian said in a relaxed tone, completely ignoring how disheartened he was and how he gave up everything to come to this village. Good. You can live a few more years than me. Remember to visit me on my grave every year. I'm afraid of loneliness, the old woman said with a trembling voice and tears in her eyes. But Chang Tian replied with a simple word. After the old woman passed away, he moved to her grave and guarded her every day so that she wouldn't be lonely. The old woman sized up everything in the courtyard as if she wanted to imprint the entire place where this old man had lived for decades in her heart. She sorted out her emotions and said, "This time, I'm here to invite you out of the mountain." "I'm not interested in those things anymore," Chang Tian replied faintly. "The Empress of Deyo, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. She's currently in Tianjing Basin," the old woman said. Upon hearing this, Chang Tian's expression finally changed, and the faint smile on his face disappeared. "How many people?" "There's only her and 2 servants who are merely at the peak of the man-will level. Who else is going to make a move? Including your 17 spirit wheel experts and all the earth wheel experts in Tianjing Basin." The young girl beside the old woman turned to look at her master with her mouth wide open. Weren't there only 13 famous spirit wheel experts in Tianjing Basin? Including the people in front of him, there were only 14. Good. After I finish pasting this umbrella, I'll follow you down the mountain. This umbrella is what I promised, and I can't make half of it. As the old man spoke, he held the paper umbrella in his hand again. Even if he had let go of everything, there were still some things that he couldn't let go. It wasn't for himself, but for the millions of people in Tianjing Basin. One day later, 3 figures stood at the entrance of the valley and turned to look back. More than 10 villagers were standing not far behind the 3 of them. They were holding a bundle in their hands. "Elder Chang, I've picked some mulberry seeds that you like to eat. I've packed them in this bundle for you to eat on the way. Also, I've packed the dough balls that I've made with Suzy leaves for you. Grandpa Chang, come back soon." The old man took a deep look at each and every one of them. He remembered all these simple villagers in his heart before taking the bundle and saying, "There's no need to send me off. I'm leaving and will be back soon." On Mount Qingniu, 5 figures strode down the mountain. 4 of them not only dressed the same, but even their appearances were exactly the same. The only differences were that one of them had a mole on the left corner of his mouth, another had a mole on the right corner of his mouth, one had a mole above his lip, and the last one had a mole below his lip. One of them roared, and the other 3 opened their mouths in unison. Their voices were so loud that they traveled dozens of kilometers. All the beasts on the mountain were frightened to the ground, and all the birds soared into the sky. "Ha, there will be a day when the 4 of us can make a move. Let's take a look at those old bastards and see how many of them are still alive." At the Golden Ring residence, Zhan Changkong, Painting Fairy, and the various attendants stood in front of the residence. At this moment, everyone was different from when Rinpoche first met them. Everyone was armed and overflowing with murderous intent. "Su Huan, after we leave, the residence will depend on you," Zhan Changkong said. "Chief, why don't I go while you and Madam stay behind?" A man in his 30s said. "Since we are going to do it, we have to do our best. This matter concerns everyone in Tianjing Basin, so how can we be afraid of death? Furthermore, with your talent, there is hope for you to enter the spirit wheel level in the future. Also, if Kaisian comes back, take good care of her." Painting Fairy's eyes were full of tenderness as she watched her husband give his instructions. In Wangbei City, the main door of the residence in the middle opened, and a dignified middle-aged man strode out. Behind him were more than 10 men and women wearing helmets and armor. In front of him was a cavalry of hundreds of people. The middle-aged man looked ahead, turned around and said, "Zai, come here. Father! A valiant-looking young man strode forward. If I don't come back, the North Alliance will be handed over to you, the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The night before, he had already told his son about all the important people in the North Alliance, including who he could trust and who he couldn't. Regardless of who came back alive, his son would have a countermeasure. However, before they set off, he was still a little worried. Father, you will definitely come back safely. I wish you a triumphant return, the young man said in a clear voice. Ha, cheesy Xiao, the fifth most powerful expert in the world, who dares to say that they will come back alive? The middle-aged man laughed. Then he hesitated for a moment before slowly placing his hand on the young man's head and touching it. This was the first time he had touched the young man's head like this since he was 5 years old. Father! The young man's eyes were a little red. Sissy! The middle-aged man couldn't bear to see him like this and scolded. A few women wearing helmets and armor behind him immediately glared at him. Let's go, the middle-aged man said in a deep voice. The North Alliance. Many of the cavalrymen in front straightened their bodies and shouted. Southern Metropolis, Green Bellflower, Lingshan Sect, Mangsing Pavilion, Nine Blades Sect, Death Toad Sect. Whether they were famous or not, whether they were well-known sects in Tianjin Basin or gangs that were looked down upon by the people, whether they were the higher-ups of the 3 major powers or the elders living in seclusion in the mountains. Chapter 453. Renbaqian sat in the courtyard in a daze. The sound of wood being sawed could be heard not far from him. Zhang Kaixian was playing the arrow happily, and her face was blooming with happiness. Lin Xiaola was sleeping on the wall. Yes, on top of the wall. Bang. Every time this sound was heard, Lin Xiaola would fall off the wall and climb back up drowsily. According to her, the room was too quiet, and the sound of sawing disturbed her sleep. She simply ran outside. Although it was noisier, the noise of people on the street made the sawing sound less prominent, and she could fall asleep this way. The city that Renbaqian was in was called Ming City, and it was located in the center of Tianjin Basin. He came with the people from the hidden village. Before they arrived, the nearby sects had already gathered here. There were dozens of earth wheel experts and 1 spirit wheel expert. This was only the surrounding area. After his group arrived, more people arrived in succession over the past 2 days. Renbaqian couldn't help but worry when he thought of what he heard. All the experts in Tianjin Basin were rushing here. Now, the Empress had really become the big boss. The current situation was equivalent to all the guilds and individual players in the entire server forming a team to defeat the world boss. Renbaqian had participated twice when he was playing games and felt that it was pretty cool and hot-blooded, especially with the background music, which made people's adrenaline soar. Looking at everyone's fighting spirit and thinking about how the world boss was his fiancée, Renbaqian cursed in his heart. If he had a slightly more reliable person, he would have sent him to deliver a letter to Gu City. However, Lin Xiaola, Renbaqian was afraid that she would fall asleep halfway. The hot weather coupled with the ear-piercing sawing sound made Renbaqian a little impatient. He stood up, walked around the courtyard twice, threw a piece of white rabbit creamy candy at Lin Xiaola, informed Zhang Kaixian, and walked out of the courtyard. After he walked out, he turned his head to take a look. Sure enough, Lin Xiaola was following him silently. Who do you think will win? Renbaqian couldn't help but ask. He had already asked this question many times. Lin Xiaola replied with the same sentence, Don't you already have a guess? But you are an expert, so you have better foresight and know more than me. If it were me, I would at most be able to face 3 spirit wheel experts. If there were any more, I would have to run. However, I will bring you along when I escape, so don't worry. In any case, Lin Xiaola still remembered that he was her owner. However, this wasn't what he was worried about. Renbaqian stopped talking and shifted his gaze to the 4 old men who looked the same, except for the mole near their mouths that was in a different position. The 4 of them noticed his gaze and smiled amiably. They then glanced at Lin Xiaola and brushed past the 2 of them. Renbaqian looked back and saw that the 4 of them were heading in the direction of the warlord's residence, which was now the headquarters of many experts. He had never seen these 4 people before, so they must be experts who had just arrived. With each passing day, the number of experts in the city would increase. The streets were very lively. Warriors with weapons could be seen from time to time, and all of them were metal weapons. "Brother below, would you like to come up for a drink?" Rinpoche heard the shout above him and looked up. He saw a man leaning on the window of the second floor of a shop next to him, looking in his direction with a smile on his face. Rinpoche looked to his left and right and heard the man shout, "Brother from the Yun Nation, would you like to come up for a drink?" Rinpoche then confirmed that he was indeed called. He thought for a while and walked up to the second floor. This was a restaurant, and there weren't many people at this time. A young man in his 20s stood by the window on the second floor. He was very good-looking, gave off a sincere feeling when he smiled, and was dressed in embroidered clothes. He was the young man who called out to Rinpoche just now. Seeing the two of them come up, he cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, brother." "Greetings, senior." "You know me?" Rinpoche asked. "Mr. Yunxian, or should I say, Principal Ren, would you like to sit down and have a chat?" Rinpoche's mind buzzed at the young man's words. An uncontrollable murderous intent emerged from the bottom of his heart as he coldly said, "Kill him." It never crossed his mind that the other party was trying to trick him. This was because ordinary people would never imagine that the so-called guest from the Yun Nation would actually be the husband chosen by the Empress. Furthermore, the other party directly said that he would be the principal. It was obvious that the other party knew a lot of things. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, she transformed into a gust of wind and pounced at the man by the window. "Wait, it's not an enemy." The young man on the other side swayed a few times before flipping over and jumping out of the window. However, in less than 3 seconds, he crashed through the window with a claw mark on his face and fell back in. Without saying a word, Rinpoche took out his gun, raised his hand, and fired 3 shots at the other party's head. "We're not enemies, let's work together," the young man shouted as he flipped over and dodged Rinpoche's gun. "Stop!" Rinpoche hesitated for a while and finally spoke up. He wanted to hear what Rinpoche had to say. Seeing that Lin Xiaola had returned to his side, the man heaved a sigh of relief. At this moment, the young man wasn't as calm as before. His body was covered in wood shavings, his hair was disheveled, and his face was covered in claw marks. He was so close to getting his head smashed open by Lin Xiaola. The young man took a few deep breaths and threw an ingot of silver to the innkeeper, who ran over after hearing the noise as compensation. He then smiled bitterly and said, "It's really dangerous to deal with Principal Ren. Your skills are not bad." Rinpoche praised insincerely. Speaking of which, this person's skills weren't bad. The difference in strength between a spirit wheel expert and an earth wheel expert was like heaven and earth. Previously, when Rinpoche was attacked in Lan City, the Earth Wheel Guard commander was killed in an instant when the other party suddenly attacked and used a heaven-grade weapon. Although this was due to the sudden attack and the use of a heaven-grade weapon, Lin Xiaola was much more skilled than the assassin from before. Even a spirit wheel expert like Qin Yun's sword wasn't her match. It was already amazing that this young man could withstand at least 2 blows from her without dying. In addition, the other party wasn't even 30 years old. Presumably, among the younger generation, besides people like the Empress and Li Yuanzhu, he could be considered one of the best. The young man sat down at the table next to him, and Rinpoche followed suit. After the other party took out a bottle and applied some medicinal powder to his face, the wound on his face began to heal quickly. However, the newly regenerated skin was still a little tender, and the scratch marks could still be seen. "For you?" Rinpoche calmed down and asked faintly. "You should have heard that someone from Great Xia is also here." The young man laughed and didn't seem to be affected by the life and death experience just now. If it was someone else who almost lost their life just now, they wouldn't be able to calm down even if they wanted to cooperate with you. Just based on his temperament, he wasn't an ordinary person. "It's you!" Rinpoche was surprised. He didn't expect the other party to be sent by Great Xia and know his identity. However, he kept saying that he wanted to cooperate with him, and he didn't know what he meant. "Principal Ren, you can call me Su Qing." "How did you recognize me?" Rinpoche asked. This was what he wanted to know the most at the moment. I've seen the seventh prince and happen to know that Principal Ren and the seventh prince look exactly the same. The young man smiled. Ren Baqian suddenly realized that this was where the problem lay. I didn't expect Principal Ren to change your identity and become a citizen of the Yun Nation to infiltrate the headquarters of the Secret Alliance. I think it isn't a coincidence that the Empress of Dayo appeared here. Chapter 454. Ren Baqian. Can I say that I'm here to do social research? In the end, after he left Valley City, the plot took a drastic turn for the worse. It was completely different from what he had planned before he came here. God knows how it turned out to be like this. What do you want to cooperate with? Ren Baqian asked. These people are finished. These days are the last glory of this place. Su Qing looked out of the window and sighed. Actually, I was a little worried at first. I was worried that the Aboriginals would really be chased back into the mountains after being attacked from all sides. The Yun Nation, Tianjin Basin, the Chen Nation, and finally, Great Xia were going to be besieged by all the other nations, and the result was predictable. After all, the brains of the Aboriginals. I don't think they can come up with a solution to this situation. Su Qing gave Ren Baqian a knowing look. This scene may be what many people want to see, but it's not what I want to see. The Chen Nation has sent their troops. Ren Baqian immediately grasped some information from his words. Probably in the next few days. Perhaps they have already sent out their troops. Su Qing did not hide it. There was no need to hide this kind of news. As long as Ren Baqian left Tianjin Basin, he would soon receive this news. What do you want? Ren Baqian asked. I don't want Great Xia to have no enemies. Initially, when I saw this trap of yours, I should be happy that a smart person has appeared in the ancient race. However, I soon got worried again. If you guys were to settle everything too quickly, Great Xia might shrink back after realizing that it was impossible. That's something I don't want to see either. Su Qing said. Ren Baqian immediately understood Su Qing's words. What he meant was that he hoped to see Great Xia being dragged into a quagmire and unable to extricate itself. At the very least, they had to make Great Xia reorganize their troops for another battle after suffering a crushing defeat. Great Xia's resources and soldiers were almost depleted. If they wanted to regroup and fight again in a short period of time, they had to recruit a large number of soldiers. If there weren't enough conscripted soldiers, they might even have to recruit able-bodied men. Furthermore, it would be difficult for Great Xia to prepare enough resources for hundreds of thousands of soldiers in a short period of time. Hence, they would have to increase taxes. If there were places where the people had no way of making a living, and someone with the intention of raising their arms and calling for help, it was likely that a rebellion would immediately occur. If Great Xia defeated the Aboriginals, they would be able to bring back their army to quell the rebellion. However, if Great Xia were to once again fall into a quagmire or even lose the war with the Aboriginals, their foundation would definitely be shaken. After thinking for a while, Ren Baqian thought about the problems that might arise if Great Xia were to send troops again. The crux of the matter was that the war between the Aboriginals and the other nations couldn't end in a short period of time. Otherwise, the Aboriginals would fall into a stalemate. Only then would Great Xia, who had just suffered a great defeat, make up their minds. As for taxes, the other party probably knew the situation in Great Xia better than him. Also, would the people have a hard time making a living? This wasn't a problem at all. As long as there were people on the same side in a certain city, and they had such thoughts, it was very easy to make a certain area become a place where the people had no way to make a living. Then all that was left was to raise his arm and shout. Ren Baqian felt that his theory wasn't entirely correct, but it was highly possible. He didn't ask if the other party wanted to rebel. Instead, he tapped his finger on the table a few times and asked, "What's in it for us?" "A weak Great Xia is safe for you," Su Qing said. "No, we don't need it. We don't care if Great Xia is strong or weak." Ren Baqian shook his head. With him around, with the advancement of science and technology, it was conceivable that Dayo would become prosperous and powerful in the future. Why would he care about whether Great Xia was strong or not? In the next few years, a decade, or even decades, it would put pressure on Dayo? Ren Baqian then said with some contempt. Moreover, if it's just Great Xia alone, what kind of storm can it set off? It wasn't that he was looking down on anyone, but in terms of strength, the Aboriginals could beat 10 of them. You underestimate the people of the world and Great Xia too much, Su Qing said. Wu Shengho has been scheming for so many years. If it weren't for those messy things of yours, I'm afraid that the north of Deyo would have been lost. You know a lot? Ren Baqin asked. Su Qing smiled and didn't answer this question. After all, many things that had been used on the battlefield couldn't be hidden from others. In fact, what he cared about the most wasn't the things that Ren Baqin used on the battlefield. Instead, it was the ease with which the Aboriginal troops were mobilized in battle. This included the current battle in the northeast. The Aboriginal generals were able to command the troops with ease, respond extremely quickly, and their combat power had increased by more than 30%. This was something that Great Xia couldn't achieve. He guessed that there must be a reason for this. Although there was no evidence, he had some guesses. If you have any trump cards, then take them out. People die in war. If we drag Great Xia into this, we don't know how many people will die and how much resources will be wasted. This isn't something that can be easily erased. 100 million taels of silver within 3 years. Su Qing said straightforwardly. A year's income of Great Xia's treasury. Can you afford it? Ren Baqian's heart skipped a beat. 100 million taels of silver was definitely a huge figure. This was Deyo's income for more than 10 years. After deducting the expenses of various places, there was basically not much left from Deyo's annual income of a few million taels of silver. There were too many things that could be done with this amount of money. Even Ren Baqian was a little tempted. Even though he had already made up his mind to seize the entire Yun nation, his goal was to make the Yun nation part of his territory. He definitely couldn't do too much in the Yun nation, and the money that he would get in the end might not be much more than this sum of money. The aristocratic families of Great Xia are still very wealthy. I will get them to fork out this sum of money, but it will take some time for Great Xia to be in chaos. Su Qing smiled confidently. Ren Baqian somewhat appreciated this kind of thinking of, I don't have it, but I can seize it. In addition, you still have to help me do 3 things, Ren Baqian said. The rest were all fake and were things to be done in the future. With this snitch, it would be easier for him to get through this safely. Speak. First, help me send a letter to the Protectorate of Goose City within 2 days. I think you should have people in Goose City, and you should also have some means of communication, Ren Baqian said. Shi Wanya should be on his way, right? However, I can do this. After delivering the letter, my people will withdraw from Goose City. Su Qing smiled. Ren Baqian was relieved to see that Su Qing had agreed. In fact, 2 days after knowing that the Empress had come to Tianjin Basin, he had thought of the radio station. However, what made him want to smash the wall was that the radio station was completely unusable. At first, he thought that it was due to the magnetic field of Mount Tianyun, but on the way here from Mount Tianyun, the radio station still couldn't be used. No matter which channel it was tuned to, there was only a bunch of ear-piercing noise. This made Ren Baqian suspect that there was a problem with the ionosphere above Tianjin Basin, and he had no choice but to give up on using the radio station. This wasn't his fault but the world's. Lin Xiaola was also unreliable. Now that he had Su Qing's help to pass the message, the biggest problem was finally solved. At the very least, in the worst-case scenario, he wouldn't find more than a dozen spirit wheel experts playing mahjong in a circle when he returned to Earth with the Empress. I will tell you the other 2 things in a few days, Ren Baqian said. I have to do it. I won't make things difficult for you. Ren Baqian smiled. It had to be said that these remnant citizens of the Hao nation were really unlucky. Of the 2 foreign aid, one was an undercover agent, and the other was a snitch. Anyone who knew about this situation would vomit blood. Tell me, other than the muscles in your brain, is there anything else that is presentable? You can't even find the way to the inn, and you made me walk such a long distance. A crisp voice said. You can't find the inn either, right? Another coarse voice retorted. Do you believe that I will shoot you into the wall? The voices on the street made Ren Baqian's ears twitch. Was this a little Lolita? Why were they here? Chapter 455. Ren Bachien craned his neck to take a look. Sure enough, it was little Lolita. She was holding some local snacks in her hand, and beside her was a tall and well-built student. The two of them stood together. Just by looking at their backs, one would think that they were father and daughter. If there's any news, remember to inform me, Ren Bachien said. They don't trust me very much either. After all, you and I are outsiders. In fact, now that things have come to this point, you don't need to worry about anything. Su Qing smiled. Ren Bachien felt that he had a lot to worry about. Whatever the other party thought he didn't have to worry about, he had to worry about. Both sides received unequal information to begin with. I'll have someone deliver the letter to you later. As for the other two matters, I'll let you know when the time comes. Within a short period of time, the rebellion in Tianjing Basin won't stop. Ren Bachien nodded at him, got up, and left with Lin Xiaola. From beginning to end, his expression was very calm, as if he had a card up his sleeve. No matter what, he had to put on a show. He couldn't let the other party see through him. He was the only one who knew how worried he was before he came to this building. After he left, Su Qing sat there and laughed. He poured himself a glass of wine and took a sip. Great Xia was already rotten and should have been overthrown long ago. Everything that was taken away should be returned. It was a pleasant surprise to be able to meet Qi Zixiao's husband. The biggest reason why he said everything so clearly was because he wasn't afraid that the other party would find out. So what if the aboriginals knew that Great Xia was going to fall into chaos? The current land in Dayo was more than enough for the barbarians to wreak havoc. Even if Great Xia were to fall into chaos, the aboriginals would at most take advantage of the situation and leave. How could they stay in Great Xia and not leave? Those barbarians didn't have that many people to manage the place. If their territory was too big, they would be stuffed to death. Furthermore, Great Xia wasn't Tianjing Basin, and Qi Zixiao wasn't number one in the world. When there was a war or a change of dynasty, those experts would not make a move. If the aboriginals entered Great Xia's territory and didn't want to leave, someone would naturally show up. He believed that 100 million taels of silver would be enough to tempt the other party. The aboriginals wouldn't be able to accumulate such wealth even if they gave it to them for 100 years. These people are dead. Su Qing poured himself a cup and drank by himself. His gaze followed the window and looked in the direction of the city lord's mansion. He thought to himself, then smiled. What did these people have to do with him? Ren Bachien went downstairs and whispered to Lin Xiaola, I saw Tong Lan just ahead. Go and find them, but don't alarm them. Come back and tell me. Why do I feel like I'm getting busier and busier? Lin Xiaola said with some dissatisfaction. Lin Xiaola knew who Tong Lan was. After all, they had gone to the salt well previously and traveled all the way here this time. Even though Tong Lan was sleeping most of the time, she still remembered the youngest girl. Ren Bachien cast a sidelong glance at her and asked, Where did you get the courage to say this? Without waiting for her to refute, he urged, I'll give you 3 more pieces of candy. Hurry up and go. Lin Xiaola bared her teeth at him, and in a flash, she landed on the roof of a nearby building. She widened her eyes and searched through the crowd, moving forward. Ren Bachien stretched his body. Now, he could finally relax. Originally, he was still worried that even if he brought the Empress to Earth during a crisis, they would still be surrounded when they returned. That would be troublesome. After all, the other party wouldn't give up so easily. Under the circumstances where there was no other way, they might just wait there. As long as he informed Shiwanya, he didn't need to worry about the following matters. Perhaps, their so-called encirclement and suppression of the Empress would really turn into a complete wipeout. If that happened, it would become a trap set by him and the Empress, waiting for those idiots to fall into it. Regardless of whether the truth was true or not, what he said was true. Walking on the street, he wasn't feeling restless anymore. His waist wasn't sore, and his legs weren't hurting anymore. He looked at the shops on both sides of the street with great interest, as well as the pedestrians coming and going. Not long after, Lin Xiaola returned to Ren Bachien's side and said, Found them. Following her guidance, Ren Bachien saw Tong Lan in the crowd. That girl was still bickering with the student beside her about the location of the inn. Renbachien didn't approach the two of them. He found a shop along the way, borrowed a pen and paper, and wrote some simplified Chinese characters on it. Then, he crumpled the paper into a ball and handed it to Lin Xiaola. When the two of them turned into a secluded alley and were about to change to another street, Renbachien threw the paper at Tong Lan. Tong Lan reacted very quickly. She immediately leaped into the air, turned around, and saw that the person who threw the paper was Lin Xiaola, who was standing on a roof in the distance. "It's her?" Tong Lan was surprised. The other student asked. "The bed warmer by Yagui's side." Lin Xiaola curled her lips and said, "Yagui must be nearby." "What does bed warming mean?" Tong Lan fell into deep thought. "This is a good question. The weather is already hot, so wouldn't it be even hotter if someone warms the bed? I will go back and ask Grandpa." She then picked up the paper and said, "It seems like it's for us. There will be major changes. Think of a way to inform the other 4 groups to quickly leave Tianjin Basin. Don't pass through cities and towns. Choose the wilderness. Inscription: Your grandfather will always be your grandfather, and your teacher will always be your teacher." Damn that Yagui. Tong Lan gritted her teeth and cursed after reading the inscription. In fact, with the simplified Chinese characters and the fact that she had seen Lin Xiaola before, she would have known who wrote it even if it wasn't inscribed. However, he had to add such an inscription that made her gnash her teeth. Major changes? These people are going to rebel? Another student subconsciously thought of this answer. After all, most of the students who came here were the children of officials. Even those who didn't know about the situation now knew about the situation here. "I'm afraid so. Let's go back and look for them first." Tong Lan glared at him and said, "It's all because your brain has nothing but muscles. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have gotten lost. It's all because they made the city too messy. It's not easy to find them." That student immediately found a scapegoat. Otherwise, he would have been nagged at by this little brat for a long time. Unfortunately, he couldn't beat her. After spending half a day, the two of them finally found the inn. At this time, the others had already gone back for a long time. The two of them called the others into the room and showed the note to them. "How can we just run away when they are rebelling? Won't we be laughed at when we go back? Why don't we kill their warlord?" That's a good idea. Many people were tempted. It was difficult for them to make contributions on the battlefield with their strength, but now, there was a great contribution in front of them. They also have experts. You guys aren't even enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Since Yagui has said so, let's leave first. The other groups still don't know about this matter. Finally, a rational person spoke up. Chapter 456. That night, Renbachien sealed the letter with wax and sent it to Su Qing after finding out where he lived. Over the next few days, Renbachien saw waves of experts from all over Ming City. On this day, the people from the North Alliance arrived. The leader of the Northern Alliance, Taifeng, arrived at the scene with a dozen armored generals and hundreds of knights. Taifeng was a spirit wheel expert, and he wasn't a weakling. The dozens of generals were all earth wheel experts, and the hundreds of knights were all man wheel experts. This wasn't the strength of the entire North Alliance, but the strength of Wangbei City. This city alone was stronger than the Golden Ring residence, one of the 8 major sections. This showed the strength of the North Alliance. Taifeng hadn't been in the city for long when the Northern Alliance's experts began to gather. They were the most powerful force in the city. "The chief of the North Alliance, Taifeng, is inviting me to a banquet?" Renbachien looked at the invitation in his hand and was slightly surprised. He knew that Taifeng had entered the city and even took a look at him from the entrance. He didn't expect that he would be invited to a banquet the night he entered the city. "Should I go?" Renbachien read the invitation again and pondered for a while. To be honest, he didn't have any intention of building a good relationship with these people. There was no need. However, it was good to go and see the experts from all over the world. At least, he would be able to know some of them. In addition, he wanted to see if he could get any useful information. That night, he went to Taifeng's banquet. He didn't get any useful information, but he did get to know some of the important people in the North Alliance. In addition, The dance of the group of naked girls that night had left a deep impression on him. Very deep. It was so deep that he even dreamed of a demonic dance at night. After waking up, Rinpoche directly threw the underwear into the trash can without any intention of destroying the evidence. This kind of thing wasn't worth paying attention to in modern times. After thinking about it carefully, he hadn't touched a girl for a long time and didn't know when he would be able to touch the Empress when he reached the earthwheel level. He was living the life of a monk with a pure heart and few desires. He didn't know if it was planned, but the first day the North Alliance arrived, and the second day the Southern Metropolis, one of the three major powers, also sent an invitation to Rinpoche. After 2 consecutive nights of demonic dances, Rinpoche felt as if weeds had grown in his heart. On the third day, the green bellflower from the 3 major powers finally arrived. A group of female soldiers. Before the arrival of the green bellflower, Rinpoche had great fantasies about this power with a beautiful name and a large number of women. After all, the name itself could confuse people greatly. However, when he saw the woman, sitting on the back of an elephant with a waist circumference of 8 feet and an arm-thick iron rod hanging beside the elephant, he was so scared that he almost fell off the wall. Just looking at the one in front was enough to make him lose interest in the people behind him. Fortunately, the female army of the green bellflower had no intention of hosting a banquet. Otherwise, Rinpoche would have to rack his brains to think of a way to reject them without incurring a grudge. He was not afraid of offending people, but he did not want to be stared at during this period of time. In the past 3 days, apart from the 3 great powers, there were also sects of various sizes, including 7 of the 8 great sections. He even met the famous Mangsing Pavilion in Tianjin Basin. They arrived at the same time as the green bellflower, but they entered the city later than the green bellflower. Compared to the undeserving reputation of the green bellflower, Rinpoche had to admit that the Mangsing Pavilion lived up to its name. Not to mention the experts dispatched by the Mangsing Pavilion, the dozen or so disciples accompanying them could be considered heavenly beauties. In particular, with more than a dozen cold-looking beauties going together, the quantitative change caused a qualitative change that really made people unable to take their eyes off them. When the green bellflower and the Mangsing Pavilion arrived, Qingyun's sword gathered everyone together for the first time. The venue was the warlord's residence. There were many people who came. Not only were there big and small powers, but there were also those senior experts who lived in seclusion. Even if only the main figures from the big and small powers went, including those experts who lived in seclusion, there were still 200 to 300 people. At the appointed time, Rinpoche and Lin Xiaola met Su Qing and an old man at the gate of the warlord's residence. Both parties looked at each other with a tacit understanding in their eyes. Mr. Yi, after talking to you the last time, I was suddenly enlightened. You have dabbled in astronomy and geography, and I really admire you. I can't wait to have a detailed discussion with you. Su Qing smiled and greeted him loudly. Rinpoche was stunned. What was going on? Could it be that they were going to flatter each other? Rinpoche immediately replied, "You flatter me. I also yearn for your affairs in the brothel. In particular, I yearn for the Bingdi lotus and the 4 blooming flowers." This time, it was Su Qing's turn to be stunned. What was going on? What happened to flattering each other? I boasted that you have dabbled in astronomy and geography, but you said that I have affairs in the brothel? This doesn't seem to be right. Su Qing looked around and saw that the people from the Mangsing Pavilion who had just entered were looking at him with disdain. There was nothing wrong with going to the brothel and showing off to the men, but it was more disgusting for the women. Su Qing laughed and said, "Mr. Yi, you must be joking with me." "Ah, of course." Su Qing then winked at him, and both of them walked in side by side without saying much. There were too many experts around, and even a whisper couldn't be concealed. After entering the warlord's residence, they saw a circle of tables in the courtyard. At the front were the seats for the major powers, and Rinpoche and Su Qing each had a table. Behind them were the sects and experts who lived in seclusion and the leaders of some small powers. As the two of them found their seats and sat down under the guidance of the attendants, there was still a steady stream of people coming in. Rinpoche felt that this was a martial arts conference. However, the purpose wasn't to elect the chief, but to suppress the devil who had brought disaster to the martial arts world. Well, that's right. That devil was his fiancée. The courtyard was bustling with voices, and all kinds of greetings and attempts to establish relationships filled everyone's ears. Rinpoche turned to look at Lin Xiaola and saw that she was almost banging her head on the table. Fortunately, this chaos didn't last long. Qingyun's sword stood at the front and pressed his hands on the table. "Everyone, please be quiet." His voice was heard throughout the hall. The courtyard immediately quieted down. "This is the most complete gathering we have ever had. It's truly a grand occasion." Qingyun's sword sighed with emotion. The three major powers, the sects and experts who lived in seclusion were gathered together. Even 70 years ago, there wasn't such a scene. After all, after a series of wars, more than half of the experts had withered. I'm sure everyone knows the reason for gathering all of you here today. The fifth most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao, the Empress of Deyo, is currently in Tianjing Basin. This is our chance, our best chance. If we seize this opportunity, our descendants will no longer be trapped in this cage and will be able to soar freely in the vast sky. I won't say any more nonsense. Some of you here can see that day, and some won't. Including me, no one knows if they will survive this battle. However, everyone still came here without hesitation for the same goal. For everyone in Tianjing Basin and for our descendants, what we see isn't just this vast sky, Qingyun's sword said as he pointed to the top of his head. Everyone felt the same way. Qingyun's sword's words resonated with everyone's hearts. Qi Zixiao was very strong. She was so strong that no one here was a match for her in a one-on-one fight. Even if many of them fought together, they still wouldn't be a match for her. However, some things had to be done by someone. Where there was blood, there had to be people. Many of them had already made arrangements for their funeral, and some had even prepared coffins. Among them, there was good and evil. There were experts who were well known in Tianjing Basin, and there were also hermits who mingled in the streets. They might not be able to see the future, but they wanted to fight for a future for the people of Tianjing Basin. This was the roar of all of them after being imprisoned for 70 years. It was their resistance. "Where is she?" someone shouted with a murderous aura. "Where is she? Kill her. Kill her and kill our way out. Kill our way out." Following Qingyun's sword speech, everyone was boiling with murderous intent. "She's waiting for us." Qingyun's sword's words made everyone quiet down. Rinpoche frowned slightly. "She's 400 kilometers away from here and hasn't moved for 3 days. She sensed us and is waiting for us," Qingyun's sword said in a deep voice. "I don't know if we should say that she's arrogant and underestimates us, or that she's arrogant and has too much confidence in herself. I originally wanted to surround her after gathering everyone, but I didn't expect her to simply stop and wait for us there." Hearing this, Rinpoche sighed in his heart. "Your Majesty, you should be more careful, not far away." Su Qing glanced at Rinpoche. This was the preparation to pull in the net. However, he didn't see the complacent look on Rinpoche's face. Instead, he looked bitter and hateful. Chapter 457. After that, Rinpoche focused half of his attention on listening to Qingyun's sword's arrangements and the other half on thinking. He occasionally turned his head to look at Lin Xiaola, who was sleeping soundly with her head propped on the table. Her saliva was dripping from her mouth and forming a large pool on the ground. Rinpoche felt that she might need to sew her mouth shut. She looked like a pretty girl, but why was she drooling every day? Qingyun's sword was still making arrangements at the front. After all, they weren't going to surround and kill the Empress. That wouldn't be very effective. Qingyun's sword divided the Earth Wheel experts into 11 groups and divided them into inner and outer formations. This way, they could maximize everyone's strength and reduce casualties. However, they only had 3 days to practice these formations. By then, everyone's level of cooperation would determine the power of these two formations. Fortunately, everyone was an Earth Wheel expert, and their reactions were much stronger than ordinary people and man-wheel experts. Even if time was tight, They should be able to practice the formations to a certain standard. Everyone discussed until it was very late before they left. Rinpoche returned to his residence, wrote a letter, and then looked for Su Qing. He finally realized that the mutual flattery in front of the warlord's residence was very useful. At least it gave the two of them a reasonable excuse to meet so late at night. My men have already left Gu City. After all, their identities have been exposed, and there is no value in staying there. Su Qing wasn't surprised by Rinpoche's arrival, but he was surprised by his request. After all, Rinpoche had already sent a letter back, and he didn't expect him to send a second one. In his opinion, since he had already set up a trap, he just had to wait for these people to step into it. He didn't understand why Rinpoche was so anxious to send a second letter. Unless they didn't make any arrangements? As soon as this idea popped up in his mind, he dispelled it. Qi Zixiao's appearance here had attracted everyone's attention, and Rinpoche's appearance among these people was already a very obvious trap. It was impossible for there to be any mistakes in the arrangements. In fact, even if there were mistakes, it didn't matter. With Qi Zixiao's strength and the protectorate of the north led by Shiwanya, as long as these people gathered together and attacked, they would be able to eliminate more than half of them. The remaining people wouldn't be able to cause much trouble. The second condition. Rinpoche stretched out 2 fingers while Su Qing was thinking. Su Qing looked at him and laughed. He stretched out 2 slender fingers and took the letter from Rinpoche's hand. Do you want to stay and chat about the affairs of a brothel? He waved his hand and left. What was the point of listening to others talk about brothels? I'll go there myself when I get back, but I'll have to find Tong Jinye to take the blame. For the next few days, everyone was pulled out of the city to practice the array formation. At the same time, they were waiting for the few people who hadn't arrived yet. Most importantly, there were 2 spirit wheel experts among them. Rinpoche hoped that these days would continue. According to the time, Shiwanya should have already set off with his men. Rinpoche didn't know if the second letter had reached him. The second letter contained the Empress's location. If the Empress was really waiting, the siege should be taking place in the vicinity of that city. However, things didn't go as Rinpoche wished. 3 days later in the evening, Rinpoche received a notice to set off the next morning. Rinpoche calculated the time and realized that it should be 5 to 6 days before Shiwanya received the letter. Even if he left immediately, it would only be 5 days. Rinpoche had walked for about 20 days from Gu City to this place. However, he traveled in an ox cart and took a long detour. If he rode at full speed and took into account that the mounts needed to rest, it would take at least 10 days to reach the Empress's location from Gu City. This meant that Shiwanya wouldn't be able to catch up no matter what. If everything went well, he should be able to see Shiwanya when he brought the Empress back to Earth. Another thing that Rinpoche wasn't sure about was how many spirit wheel experts would survive the fight with the Empress and face Shiwanya. If there were too many, he was afraid that Shiwanya would be sending himself to die. Rinpoche calculated in his heart. There were too many variables, and he couldn't calculate them clearly. He could only take it one step at a time. That night, Ming City was much quieter. They would set off the next day and would arrive in 2 days at most. Everyone took this time to adjust their state of mind or check their weapons. Even Rinpoche had checked the fortified smoke grenades to see if they would be able to contribute to the war. At least, according to Rinpoche's estimation, these people's formations wouldn't work. The important thing in this batch of fortified smoke bombs wasn't the smoke itself, but the substance added to the smoke bombs. The smoke was a complementary product. What was added to the smoke bombs was concentrated skunk musk. This was the secretion of skunk. It was said that the moment one was sprayed with the skunk liquid, it felt as if someone had smashed the back of their head with a baseball bat. Then, a pair of big hands twisted their lungs into a ball, and they couldn't breathe at all. Needless to say, it was painful to the eyes. She immediately burst into tears and could even make people faint. This wasn't just an attack on the sense of smell, but also touch, sight, taste, sixth sense, and seventh sense. Furthermore, this smell would linger on the body for about a week, even if it was carefully cleaned. This smell was indescribable. The difference between stinky tofu and this thing was probably the difference between Lei Feng and Lei Feng Pagoda. The substance added to Renbachian's smoke bombs was said to be 2 to 3 times stronger than skunk musk. It was enough to make people doubt their lives and doubt that being alive was a mistake. Under the circumstances where weapons of mass destruction couldn't be used, Renbachian felt that this thing might be the most effective. Of course, in a certain aspect, this thing could also be said to be a type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, this thing also had a lot of shortcomings. The biggest one was probably that using this thing was equivalent to perishing together. After all, if this thing was thrown out, even if it was thrown in the surroundings, he and the Empress would probably be enveloped by that terrifying smell. Renbachian didn't dare to imagine the Empress's expression at that time. It would definitely be very interesting. After thinking about it, Renbachian shivered and immediately encouraged himself. If possible, he didn't want to use this type of biological weapon of mass destruction. However, in order to save people, he had no other choice. Sigh, this is life. Renbachian sighed, turned his head, and glanced at Lin Xiaola, who was leaning against the headboard. If he remembered correctly, this girl's sense of smell seemed to be much better than his. Lin Xiaola suddenly quivered in her sleep, looked at Renbachian with sleepy eyes, and asked, "What happened?" "Nothing, continue to sleep." Renbachian waved his hand. The night passed. The next day, everyone set off. Chapter 458. In an inn in Wu City. "Miss, are you leaving today?" Qing Yuan opened the window, and Hong Yuan brought the Empress a basin to wash up. "No," the Empress replied faintly. In her mouth was a toothbrush that she brought back from Earth, which was much more comfortable to use than a tree branch. In the eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, a small toothbrush was very luxurious. At least, other people, including the ministers of the imperial court, used a tree branch to clean their mouths. "Is there anything here that Miss is concerned about?" Qing Yuan asked softly. The Empress usually stayed in the previous cities for 1 or 2 days before leaving. However, she had stayed here for 7 days, which puzzled the two of them. "I have seen what I wanted to see, and it's about time," the Empress said after washing up. "What time?" "If the remnant citizens are going to make any moves, they should be here in a few days." "I thought they would come a few days ago," the Empress said. In fact, after leaving Longzhou City, she found that there were people paying special attention to her in every city. Some of them were street vendors, some were passers-by, and some were city guards. Since then, she knew that she was being followed. She originally thought that she would see some people soon, but unexpectedly, it was very calm. Under the calmness, an even more turbulent undercurrent was brewing. The Empress wanted to see the experts among the remnant citizens, see what they would say to her, and see what tricks they had up their sleeves. In addition, she didn't know if that guy knew that she was here. Many people in Tianjin Basin should know, and he should be aware of it, right? If he still didn't know, she should hang him on the city wall and whip him every day. After washing up, the Empress wasn't in the mood to go out. Standing in front of the window, she could see a tall mountain in the distance, which should be a good place to bury people. Those so-called experts in Tianjin Basin should be satisfied to be buried there. After standing in front of the window for a long time, the Empress turned to the two of them and said, "Play cards with me." "I'll go get it." "Sister Hong Yuan, you play." Qing Yuan rolled her eyes and scurried out of the room. They weren't Principal Ren and didn't dare to win when playing cards with the Empress. Even if they won, they didn't dare to stick a note. It was better to watch from the side. The Empress played from morning to afternoon and plastered Hong Yuan like a mummy. Finally, she sat on the bed contentedly. Not long after, the Empress's eyes lit up. In a flash, she disappeared from the room and reappeared on the roof. He looked around and saw 5 people standing on the surrounding rooftops. There were men and women, young and old. There was a silver-haired old man in a green robe, a beautiful middle-aged woman, and a dwarf who was only half the size of an ordinary person. The 5 of them just stood there without making any movements, but they had their own imposing manner. 5 spirit wheel experts. That's less than what I expected. I've waited for so long in vain. The Empress's cold voice could be heard clearly within a radius of a kilometer. Azure Cloud soared Tong Kai. Naturally, it was the old village chief that Rinpoche had met before. At this moment, he no longer had the image of an old hooligan. With a long sword on his back, a sharp sword aura surrounded his entire body, making him look like a heaven-piercing sword. Full Star Pavilion's Shan Ro. The one who spoke was the beautiful middle-aged woman. Her eyes were like water as she smiled at the Empress. Unaffiliated person Lu Xiangdong. The one who spoke was the unusually small dwarf. Unaffiliated person Chang Tian. It was an old man in his 60s or 70s who held a paper umbrella in his hand. North Alliance's Tai Feng. This was a middle-aged man with a broad build. The five of them bowed to the Empress. This was a show of respect for the strong. Only those who had reached their level would know how powerful the woman in front of them was. Your Majesty, please forgive us for not being able to welcome you earlier. We arrived first, and the other friends are still behind. We will definitely satisfy your Majesty, Qingyun Sword said in a clear voice. North Alliance. I will kill you first. The Empress ignored Qingyun Sword's words and muttered the words, North Alliance. Then she spoke to Tai Feng. North Alliance, Wangbei City. She had heard of this place because all of them, including Longzhou City, were under the influence of the North Alliance. The name Wangbei was enough to explain everything. Tai Feng wasn't angry or afraid. He laughed and said, It's my honor to be remembered by your Majesty. Before coming here, I have already made arrangements for my funeral. My heart and soul are all focused on this battle. How much longer do you need to prepare? The Empress looked at Qingyun Sword. It seemed like he had more authority among them. We will arrive tomorrow night. The day after tomorrow will be fine, Qingyun Sword replied honestly. Since the Empress was waiting for them here, it had already explained everything. There was no need for him to hide anything. The day after tomorrow, I will wait for all of you at Mount Wu and see what you are capable of, the Empress said faintly. Then she disappeared from the roof and reappeared in a room. The five of them also disappeared from the roof. However, the streets were already in chaos. After all, they had spoken loudly just now and didn't intend to hide anything. No one knew the names of Qingyun Sword, Chang Tian, and Lu Xiangdong. However, the words, North Alliance's Tai Feng, and Her Majesty, were like a sledgehammer pounding on everyone's chest. The leader of the North Alliance, Tai Feng, and the Empress of Deyo were actually in Wu City. Furthermore, they were going to fight? This was a huge matter. In everyone's hearts, this was a battle. It was hard for ordinary people to imagine that the Empress could actually gather all the experts in Tianjing Basin just for one battle. Ordinary people were shocked when they heard the voice on the roof, but the innkeeper's legs were trembling. He had heard that cold voice before. After all, no one would easily forget such a beautiful lady. Thinking about the fact that there was such a deity living in the inn while he was completely ignorant, he had the thought of abandoning the inn and running back to his hometown to escape. That night, he packed up and ran away, preparing to return in a few days. After all, the Aboriginal Empress didn't have a good image in the hearts of the remnant citizens. The result of this incident was that the Empress enjoyed the entire inn for a day and 2 nights. Other than the 3 of them, almost all the mice had run away. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Empress got up and washed up. She sat in front of the table and said faintly, "Help me dress up." Qin Yuan and Hong Wan helped the Empress dress up for an hour. After the Empress was satisfied with her reflection in the mirror, she stood up and put on a bright red coat. After going out, she ran to a faraway place to eat breakfast. The innkeeper and chefs had all run away, and even the shops on the street were closed. The Empress had no choice but to run to a faraway place. After finishing breakfast, the Empress strolled in the city as if nothing had happened. She seemed to be strolling leisurely, but every step she took covered a distance of several meters. It was as if the ground had shortened under her feet. After leaving the city, every step she took covered a distance of more than 10 meters. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan had to use all their strength to barely keep up with the Empress's speed. At the same time, with every step she took, an imposing aura brewed and rose from her body. When she arrived at the foot of the mountain, The imposing aura from her body was already as heavy as the peak of a mountain. It was so heavy that it was difficult to reach. They could only look up and feel their own insignificance. Thousands of people stopped at the foot of Dark Mountain. When they sensed the mountain-like pressure coming from the woman in red, who was approaching them from afar, they all retreated to the sides like flowing water. Fear filled their eyes. These people were either the disciples of the various powers or the guards of the three major powers. The Empress acted as if she didn't see these people and continued to walk forward. The people who were either standing or sitting on the mountainside also stood up and looked down the mountain. As the Empress got closer and closer, everyone subconsciously made way for her to pass through. Rinpoche saw this scene from the crowd and repeated a sentence in his heart: "It's worth it to have such prestige in one's life." The Empress suddenly stopped in her tracks, turned her head, and looked at Rinpoche, who was in the crowd. Rinpoche smiled and gave her a thumbs up before quickly retracting it and lowering his head slightly. The Empress was happy to see him, but she said coldly, "What are you doing here?" Everyone's head turned in Rinpoche's direction. Rinpoche felt like vomiting blood. Chapter 459. Rinpoche had made many assumptions about the beginning and process of this battle. In his mind, the story should start like this. The Empress, dressed in red, stood alone on the peak of the mountain, looked down at the crowd, and said, "All of you can come at me together." Then, the Empress would fight the crowd alone. When the crowd was no match for her, they would form a formation and he would throw dozens of fortified smoke grenades, causing the crowd to flee. He would make a great contribution and receive a kiss from the Empress. Or, in a crisis, he would bring the Empress back to Earth to recuperate for a few days. When he returned, he would see Shi Wanya's face. In short, the beginning and ending of the story should be like this. However, the beginning of the story was completely different from what Rinpoche had imagined. He worked hard to infiltrate the enemy's camp, and the Empress sold him out with just one sentence. Rinpoche looked around. At present, no one was sure who the Empress was talking to, but many people were already looking at him. If he shouted, "Your Majesty, it's great to see you. I miss you so much," would they beat him up? Would the Empress be able to save him in time? Rinpoche felt that it was better to be more careful. Rinpoche sneered and said, You didn't expect this, did you? You didn't expect to see me here, did you?" When everyone heard this, they realized that Yi Yunxian had met Qi Zixiao before. And had a feud? In that case, Yi Yunxian was much more powerful than they had imagined. What kind of person was able to become enemies with Qi Zixiao and survive? He definitely wasn't just an envoy from the Yun nation. Everyone looked at Rinpoche in a different light. Rinpoche stepped forward, and everyone made way for him, waiting to see the confrontation between him and the Empress. The Empress didn't expect Rinpoche to reply so coldly. She felt a pain in her heart, raised her eyebrows, and looked at him coldly. Rinpoche was only a few dozen meters away from the Empress. As he passed through the crowd, he was on tenterhooks. When he stood in front of the crowd, he immediately relaxed and put on a warm smile. "You didn't expect me to wait for you here, right? I missed you so much." 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, and then a pounce. Then the Empress dodged, gave him a princess hug, and threw him to the ground. Everyone around them was stunned. What was going on? His tone just now gave everyone the impression that the two of them knew each other, and that there was a deep hatred between them. However, in the blink of an eye, it was true that the two of them had gotten to know each other, but their deep hatred had turned into affection? The change in style was too fast, so fast that no one could react. "Who are you?" Someone immediately reacted and shouted. This person was definitely not someone from the Yun nation. It was impossible for the people of the Yun nation to be on Qi Zixiao's side. Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. Everyone was looking at him, and many of them looked angry at being deceived. Although he hadn't been in the mood to make friends with these people, he had gotten to know quite a few people. There were people from the Golden Ring House, experts from the Northern Alliance, people from the Southern Metropolis, and people from other sections. At this moment, all of them were looking at him with confusion and anger. "Sorry, I'm a police officer. Renbachien looked at the crowd. He didn't have a bad impression of many people here. Before he came into contact with it, the number of people who died was just a number. He never cared about such numbers, didn't care, and didn't think too much about it. But after coming into contact with them, each and every one of them had flesh and blood in his mind. He sighed and continued, "You are bandits, I am an official, we are not the same people. But to be honest, all you want is to walk out of here. I came here for this purpose. You don't have to be so anxious." However, it was already too late to say this. All the experts in Tianjin Basin were here, and he couldn't possibly make them retreat obediently just by saying a few words. Therefore, he didn't want to waste his breath. "Cut the crap. You're obviously not from the ancient race, yet you're Qi Zixiao's dog. That's a disgrace to our ancestors." Someone scolded from below, followed by a wave of curses. Seeing this, the Water Empress's gaze turned even colder. Her killing intent intensified as she memorized every single person who spoke up. He could scold them, but others couldn't. Whoever cursed, he would kill. "I know who he is," someone else said. "You're the gigolo that Qi Zixiao found, right?" Renbachien touched his face. His reputation had spread all the way here. "Handsome is only on the surface. After interacting with me for a long time, you will realize that I'm more beautiful and handsome inside." Renbachien sighed. "Who said you were handsome? Don't you have any shame? Are you doubting Her Majesty's judgment?" Renbachien retorted. Everyone's anger and contempt were unmistakable. Everyone from the Golden Ring residence frowned and looked at their chief. Zhang Changkong stroked his beard with a complicated look in his eyes. He didn't expect that he would personally send a spy to the hidden village. He was filled with regret, anger, and some other thoughts. He didn't know what exactly was going on in his mind. In any case, no one dared to spit in front of the two of them. After all, the Empress was standing beside Renbachien. Even if they came with the mentality of death, they couldn't ignore the Empress's status and strength. "All of you, shut up." Qingyun's sword frowned as he looked at the farce below. "We've made a fool of ourselves in front of your Majesty," Qingyun's sword said. He then looked at Renbachien and said coldly, "I really didn't expect this." "I didn't expect it either," Renbachien replied. He really didn't expect to be among these people. "I don't like people standing higher than me," the Empress said coldly. When Renbachien came over just now, the momentum that she had accumulated was interrupted and began to fall. As she took another step, her momentum rose again. The Empress walked all the way to a higher position than everyone else before looking down. "Your Majesty, be careful," Renbachien said behind the Empress. "Retreat to the back. I want to see what these people have up their sleeves," the Empress said coldly. There were more people than she had expected. She didn't expect so many people to come. The scene was huge and there were a lot of people. Their target was her. This kind of scene made her even more eager to fight. 18 spirit wheel experts, not bad. These experts among the remnant citizens were also not bad. Tens of millions of people, all the experts among the remnant citizens were here, looking up at the Empress from below. This made the blood in the Empress's body boil, and there was a rumbling sound that sounded like a flood crashing into a river. In addition to her identity as the Empress, she was also a practitioner and the 5th most powerful expert in the world. The Aboriginal emperors were never the kind of emperors who didn't live in dangerous situations. Otherwise, why would the first emperor abandon everything and bring the experts into the mountains without any news of them? Why would the second emperor go out alone, return with serious injuries, and then disappear again? Being the Empress was a responsibility and identity, but not everything. The rumbling sound from the Empress's body caused the expressions of many spirit wheel experts to change. The blood in her body was agitated and emitted a sound like a torrent. To what extent had she cultivated her blood and qi? Renbachien stood behind the Empress and said in a different tone, "Your Majesty, why don't you let me play a song to strengthen your Majesty's prestige?" The Empress, who was about to erupt like a volcano, suddenly stopped. An ominous feeling arose in her heart. Renbachien turned around and took out the eru with a face full of smiles. With such a big scene and so many listeners, this was his chance to perform. The Empress stood there alone, facing hundreds of experts. How could an ordinary person compare to such a mighty aura? How could an ordinary person be worthy of her? Chapter 460. At this moment, the Empress even had the thought of smacking Rinpoche to death. According to her expectations, her aura should be at its peak at this moment. Regardless of whether it was her body or her mind, she should be in the best condition. However, she was interrupted twice by Rinpoche. As a result, she was always a little short of perfect condition. However, Rinpoche knew nothing about this mysterious matter and was completely oblivious to it. He cheerfully found a place to sit down with the eru in his hand and held the bow in his left hand. This was what he had learned from his grandfather. His grandfather was left-handed, and although he wasn't, he was used to this posture when playing the eru. Rinpoche sat there and pulled the bow twice to get a feel. Then, the strange notes of pomp and circumstance and the moans of the eru flowed out from his hands. The Empress immediately shivered. She was originally prepared to stand in place and let them make the first move, but now, she completely gave up on this idea. She silently turned into a red shadow and pounced on one of the 18 spirit wheel experts below. Her extreme speed made her figure a red line in the eyes of many. Tai Feng from the North Alliance. The Empress said that she would kill him first, so she would definitely kill him first. Good timing. Tai Feng laughed heartily as a long saber appeared in his hand. The saber emitted a blazing heat that caused a heat current in the air. Clang. The Empress's body trembled slightly, but Tai Feng was sent flying like a cannonball. Tai Feng was good at charging and breaking through enemy lines. His strength wasn't weak among the spirit wheel experts, but he wasn't a match for the Empress in terms of strength. Umbrella! Chang Tian pointed from afar, and a paper umbrella that was about 30 meters long appeared in the air. Open! Chang Tian shouted again, and the giant umbrella in the air suddenly opened, covering a radius of about 30 meters. The Empress suddenly felt the sky darken as if the umbrella had covered half of it. Fall! Countless steel needles fell from the umbrella like a rainstorm. Those with good eyesight would be able to see that these weren't steel needles, but the ribs of the umbrella. Qingyun's sword pointed with his finger, and the sword on his back was unsheathed with a clang. Dozens of sword gleams scattered in the air. A ribbon appeared in Shan Ro's hand. The front end of the ribbon, which was originally more than a meter long, kept extending forward as if it were alive. At the same time, the ribbon grew from 1 meter long to more than 10 meters long. Furthermore, it continued to extend forward and wrap around the Empress's feet. On the other hand, Lu Ludong's body transformed into a black shadow and moved in the mountains. His short stature was like that of an ape, and he reached the top of the Empress's head in no time. These 4 people were the fastest to react. After all, when the Empress said those words, they didn't feel that she was trying to intimidate them. With her status and strength, even though her words weren't the law, what she said was definitely what she was thinking. The Empress raised her hand and threw a punch at Lu Xiangdong, forcing him to retreat. Her fist didn't feel like it had made contact with a solid object. It was as if the dwarf flew along with the wind generated by her fist, landed somewhere not far away, and slid along the ground toward the Empress. After a few of them made their moves, the other spirit wheel experts followed suit. Someone was holding a fishing rod. Dozens of thin lines that were hard to detect shot out from the fishing rod and wrapped around the Empress. A chessboard appeared in someone's hand. With a slap of his palm on the chessboard, countless chess pieces shot toward the Empress. However, when the chess pieces were in the air, they turned into ferocious beasts. Out of the 18 people, 8 of them had condensed their heaven-grade weapons. Even though the other 10 were holding weapons that they were comfortable with, their speed and strength still couldn't be compared to that of an Earthwheel expert. With 18 people attacking at the same time, the Empress seemed to be surrounded by all kinds of lights. Everyone could only hear the sounds of collisions in the light circle and couldn't see anything. Although it took a long time to describe, from the moment the Empress made her move to the moment everyone counterattacked, everything actually happened in a split second. Rinpoche had just played 8 short notes when a trembling moan drilled into everyone's mind. A series of moans rang out. That could be called 1,000 poses and 100 enchanting, that could be called 100 soul-stirring, that could shake one's heart and soul. Everyone's hearts suddenly trembled. The Empress's sword fingers, which were shaped like a sword, slashed toward Lu Lu Dong, missed. With a shake of the fishing rod in the old man's hand, dozens of thin lines pierced the ground around the Empress with a piercing sound. The beasts formed by dozens of chess pieces had originally formed a flawless encirclement. However, 2 of the beasts suddenly slowed down and revealed a few flaws. The others were more or less affected by this series of moans. All of them wanted to turn their heads to look, but they resisted the urge. Their moves unconsciously slowed down by a little, and there were loopholes in their coordination with each other. When experts exchanged blows, there was a fine line of difference, let alone an expert like the Empress. She threw a few punches in succession at the spirit will expert who was holding the chessboard. After exchanging blows with him, she borrowed the momentum to pounce toward Qingyun's sword. While in the air, purplish-red lines began to appear on the surface of her body. Her aura became stronger, and she pounced down with the force of the sky falling. Qingyun's sword felt the Empress firmly locking onto him. A huge force enveloped him as if he was facing an ancient giant beast, causing a great fear to rise in his heart. She's indeed the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Qingyun's sword roared in his heart. He bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood, breaking the pressure that the Empress had enveloped him. Then he used 2 of his fingers to form a sword and slowly drew it in the air. Following his fingers, Qingyun's sword, who was floating 1 meter above his head, turned into countless rays of light that surrounded the Empress as if they wanted to mince her into pieces. "Get lost," the Empress shouted. Her hands flicked around her body, producing a clanging sound. Clang. It sounded like 2 swords colliding. Even though these rays of light couldn't mince her into pieces, she didn't want her clothes to be destroyed. The Empress turned half a circle in the air and stomped down. Qingyun's sword quickly drew a sword with his fingers, and a long sword appeared in front of him. The Empress stepped on the sword, and it turned into countless rays of light that flew in all directions. Qingyun's sword also spat out a mouthful of blood, and his feet sank 3 meters into the ground. When the Empress borrowed the momentum to soar into the air and pounced again, a paper umbrella appeared between her and Qingyun's sword. Then, everyone surrounded the Empress once again. However, at this time, there was always a sound that kept pouring into everyone's mind. The sound was like a crying beauty moaning under the bed. It wouldn't have been a big deal if that was the case, but this sound was strange and had never been heard before. It made people restless and unconsciously affected. The 5 senses of a practitioner were sharper than those of an ordinary person, let alone a spirit will expert. Let alone a spirit will expert who specialized in cultivating the spirit. Their control over their bodies was much weaker than the Empress's, and their spirits were greatly affected when they were stimulated. "Shut up!" A spirit will expert shouted angrily in Rinpoche's direction. This damn sound was too disturbing. If it weren't for the fact that they were facing a formidable enemy, he would have turned around and chopped that guy up. Rinpoche closed his mouth tightly and nodded with an aggrieved expression. "Can I just keep my mouth shut?" Then, he continued to play his eru with satisfaction. Qin Yuan and Hong Wan were worriedly looking at the battle below, but they couldn't see anything clearly. They couldn't help but look at Rinpoche as the sound of the eru made them clench their teeth and want to slap the person in front of them to the ground. As for the many earth wheel experts below, they couldn't help but plug their ears when they heard the sound of the eru. It was so stimulating that it made their hearts beat faster and faster, making them want to kill someone. Bang! A figure flew out of the battle. It was a woman holding a pair of scissors. She spat out several mouthfuls of blood in the air, and the sound of her bones breaking could be heard. She had been disturbed by the sound of Rinpoche's eru just now, and a flaw appeared between her 2 moves. The Empress seized this opportunity to break her move and punch her body a dozen times in a row, breaking her bones. If the Empress hadn't said that she would kill Tai Feng first and held back a little bit, she would have been dead by now. Even so, It would be difficult to recover without a few years of recuperation, and there was no way for her to advance further. "I'm here. Don't forget me, Your Majesty." Tai Yen, who had been punched down the mountain by the Empress just now, jumped up and shouted. Everyone immediately understood. Lu Xiangdong, Chang Tian, and Shan Rou moved closer to Tai Yen, ready to protect him at any time. Since Qi Zixiao had said so, she would only seriously injure him before killing him and not kill anyone else. This was the shackles that Qi Zixiao had placed on herself. Then, a few more sounds of the Eru reached everyone's ears, causing their hearts to skip a beat. If it wasn't for Qi Zixiao's ferocity, everyone would have smacked that fellow to death. Chapter 461. When that familiar tune sounded again, the veins on everyone's forehead bulged. It would have been fine if it was just unpleasant to listen to, but the sound of the zither always made everyone quiver, and their movements inevitably became flawed. "Stop her, I'll go!" A man shouted, turned around, and pounced up the mountain. The others immediately filled the gap left by him. The Empress's eyes flashed coldly. "You're courting death." Beating up her own people in front of her? If this wasn't courting death, then what was? The purplish-red lines on her face deepened. Completely ignoring the swords and sabers around her, she turned into a ray of red light and charged at the man. Good chance. The man in front of the Empress was delighted. He thrust his sword at the Empress with an indomitable momentum. The Empress could either dodge or face him head-on. If she dodged, she naturally wouldn't be able to catch up. If she faced him head-on, as long as he could injure her, the chances of winning this battle would be greatly increased. Trying to escape? Shan Rou sneered. The ribbon in her hand was like a snake, coiling around the Empress's feet. "Eat my rod first." A tall man leaped into the air and pointed the long rod in his hand at the Empress like a poisonous dragon. "Get lost." The Empress roared. Her hand brushed past the incoming longsword, and a series of metallic clanging sounds rang out. She flicked her fingers 17 times, and every flick of her hand carried a tremendous force that traveled along the blade of the sword and into the opponent's hand, causing the long sword to be forcefully deflected. Then, she turned her palm to face the sky, and her jade-white palm forcibly blocked the long rod that was in the air like a poisonous dragon. However, a bright flash of a saber quietly slashed across the Empress's back, causing a stream of blood to spurt out of her body. The blood quickly turned into gas as soon as it splashed into the air. This was caused by the burning of the Empress's essence blood. Once it left her body, she could no longer control it and directly vaporized. The Empress ignored the injury on her back. In a flash, she appeared outside the encirclement. Her toes tapped lightly on the ground twice, and she caught up with the man who was 3 meters away from him. "Be careful!" Everyone was shocked. The reason wasn't that the Empress broke through the encirclement so easily. They didn't even manage to injure her. It was because there was a ribbon wrapped around her feet, and there was a person on the other end of the ribbon. Shan Rou was actually dragged out by the Empress. "Let me help you!" A few of them shouted one after another. They grabbed the ribbon that was connected to Shan Rou and the Empress while the rest of them pounced toward the Empress. The Empress saw that the person in front of her was only 3 meters away. Just one more step and she would be able to catch him. At this moment, she felt a strong force coming from beneath her feet, causing her to pause. One end of the ribbon was tied to the Empress, while the other end was held in the hands of 5 or 6 people. It was like a tug-of-war. However, there were still 10 figures pouncing toward the Empress. The Empress was furious. The wrinkles on her face became darker, and her skin started to turn red. She stomped on the ground, and a force that was much greater than before was transmitted through the ribbon. Everyone was caught unprepared, and one by one, they lost their balance and were dragged away. The rubble under the Empress's feet was sent flying. When she scurried away, there was only a huge pit left in her original position. Using this momentum, she finally caught up with the person in front of her. That person turned over and threw out dozens of bone needles, followed by 6 iron awls that were as thick as fingers. The short spear in his hand suddenly turned into a long spear. He shouted, "Break!" Like a flood dragon, The spear pierced through the air and headed toward the Empress. The Empress placed her hands in front of her and allowed the dozens of bone needles to hit her body. She circulated her blood essence, and the bone needles that had just pierced through her skin turned into powder. 6 iron needles landed in the Empress's hands in a flash. She turned her hand and threw them at the people chasing behind her. Everyone was shocked and prepared to dodge. With the strength of the Empress and these specially made iron awls, if they hit a person's body, it would create a bowl-sized hole. Then, they saw that the nearest iron awl was 3 meters away from them, and it flew past them just like that. Suddenly, the Empress's arm seemed to have no bones as it wrapped around the opponent's long spear. With a twist and a shake, that person immediately lost his grip on the spear handle, and the spear flew straight into the air. At a speed that was difficult for everyone to see, the Empress pointed 7 times in a row at the chest of that person. What kind of finger is this? That person was immediately motionless like a clay puppet after being pointed by the Empress. He muttered to himself, "You are already dead." The Empress didn't even look at him. However, before he died, there was one more person that had to be killed first. She turned around and pounced behind her, but a stone under her feet flew toward Rinpochen. The sound of Rinpochen's eru not only upset the others, but also made her feel anxious. This stone went straight for the eru in Rinpochen's hand. The strength of the stone was extremely good, and it was just enough to smash the eru. However, just as the Empress turned around and pounced toward the crowd, the stone hit Rinpochen's head, who was completely immersed in the music. Rinpochen only felt his vision go black, and he fell backward. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan exclaimed softly. They didn't expect the Empress to actually kick a stone over and knock Principal Rin out. However, the 2 of them heaved a sigh of relief. If the Empress didn't make a move, the 2 of them wouldn't be able to hold it in any longer. Lin Xiaola was originally in a daze beside Rinpochen. Seeing that Rinpochen was lying down, she rested her head on his stomach and adjusted to a comfortable sleeping position. When Qing Yuan and Hong Wan turned around and saw that one of them had fainted and the other was looking for a comfortable sleeping position, they were almost scared to death. The Empress was fighting in front of them. What was Lin Xiaola doing? The Empress turned around and faced the crowd that was surrounding her. She punched the heads of the beasts that pounced at her. With a pop sound, the beasts dissipated like smoke. Every time a beast was defeated, a crack would appear on the chessboard in the hands of the person holding the chessboard. At this point in time, the cracks on the chessboard were already densely packed. Out of the dozens of beasts that were created previously, only about 10 were left on the periphery. After defeating a few beasts, the Empress leaped up and pounced toward Tai Feng, who was behind her. Her 5 fingers clawed at his head. "Stop her!" Shan Ro hurriedly shouted. A paper umbrella appeared just in time between the Empress and Tai Feng. It was Chang Tian's doing. When the paper umbrella was opened, it blocked the Empress's claw, but a hole was gouged out. Following which, he closed the paper umbrella and used it like a spear or a sword. The Empress didn't pay any attention to him. She blocked the paper umbrella with one hand and continued to grab Tai Feng with the other. Qing Yun's sword transformed into a ray of light and slashed at the Empress's neck. The ray of light that injured the Empress previously appeared again. "All of you get lost." The Empress shouted. The word, "get lost," seemed to have materialized in her mouth. A huge sound wave surged in all directions. It was like the roar of an ancient beast, causing everyone's heart to skip a beat. The redness on the surface of the Empress's skin became more vivid and the color of the veins became darker. The veins had completely turned purple. Everyone felt as if the purple veins were about to materialize and detach from the Empress's body. The Empress's eyes began to turn red. A monstrous, overbearing, ferocious, and sinister aura emanated from her body. Everyone felt as if they weren't facing a person at this moment. It was no longer that heroic lady in red, but an ancient beast that had been resurrected in front of them. Chapter 462. Die. The Empress's eyes turned red. She sped up and turned into a shadow in front of everyone's eyes. Tai Feng faced the incoming Empress with a crazed look in his eyes. His aura skyrocketed as he shouted, "Saber domain!" He stabbed the saber in his hand into the ground. The next second, numerous saber tips emerged from the ground, forming an airtight saber domain, with him as the center. However, the Empress only stepped on the saber tips. Her shoes had already been pierced, so she used the tip of her foot to tap on the saber tips as if she was dancing on them. As the Empress's figure streaked across the air, the sabers behind her shattered into pieces and turned into light spots that dissipated in the air. Everyone could see that it was a perfectly straight path amidst countless steel blades. Slash! Tai Feng's body straightened and he swung the saber in his hand from the ground. The saber was shrouded in a red glow that was several meters long and collided with the red glow of the Empress. At the same time, countless saber tips shot out from the ground and formed a saber dragon that swallowed the Empress. Dust and dirt flew everywhere, and a series of metallic clangs resounded in everyone's ears. When the dust settled, the two of them could be seen standing in the middle of the field. The Empress was holding a heart in her hand. Fresh blood was splattered on her cheeks, matching the purple veins on her face. Tai Feng clutched his chest with one hand and held the broken saber in the other. His body swayed a little before he fell to the ground. He still had a crazy look in his eyes. "I finally hurt you." Traces of blood flowed out from the Empress's abdomen. In the blink of an eye, the wound stopped bleeding. The Empress controlled her body to stop the bleeding, but the wound didn't heal. As Tai Feng fell, the flesh on the chest of the man who had fallen to the ground suddenly burst open. In the blink of an eye, only his skeleton was left. Just like the Empress said, he was already dead. Two dead, one seriously injured. The Empress had 2 saber wounds. "Chief! Warlord!" Many Earthwheel experts below shouted when they saw Tai Feng fall. The spectators all felt a tinge of sadness in their hearts. Although Tai Feng's previous 2 moves had activated all of his blood, qi, and divine soul, he wouldn't be able to live for long even if Qi Zixiao didn't kill him. However, from those 2 moves, they could tell that he was only a step away from condensing a divine weapon. Even if he didn't activate his qi, blood, and soul, he could still use it. However, he knew that he would definitely die, so he held the thought of biting Qi Zixiao even if he had to die, so he activated his qi, blood, and soul to increase his strength. That was how he managed to injure Qi Zixiao in a head-on collision. However, everyone quickly extinguished this trace of sadness. After all, everyone who had come here was prepared to die. The Empress was injured, and her eyes were red. The corners of her eyes slanted upwards, giving off a murderous vibe. She was incomparably ferocious. As she turned around, her fine black hair fluttered in the wind as she charged towards the person closest to her. "Stall for time. There's a time limit to her current state." Qing Yun's sword shouted from afar. Qi Zixiao's current state had indeed greatly improved her strength. Compared to the time when there were no wrinkles on her face, she was at least several times stronger. However, this kind of cultivation method could not be maintained for long. "Set the formation. Kill the people up there." Qing Yun's sword could see Rinpochien's position in Rinpochien's heart from how the Empress wanted to kill that spirit wheel expert even after taking a blow from him. Although this was somewhat despicable and didn't meet his lifelong goals, this was a matter of life and death. All the experts in Tianjing Basin were already here. With hundreds of people surrounding one person, he couldn't care less about anything else. As Qing Yun's sword spoke, his hands didn't slow down at all. His sword floated around the Empress. 1 second, it was in front of her, and the next moment, it appeared behind her. The trajectory of a normal sword was linear. After all, a sword couldn't move instantaneously. Regardless of whether it was a straight line or an arc, it had to be linear. However, under his control, this sword existed between points and lacked the line in the middle. "You're courting death." As the Empress deflected the attacks from the people around her, she took 2 steps forward and slammed her shoulder into Chang Tian's chest, causing him to spit out blood and fly backward. She then pounced towards Qing Yun's sword. At this time, 2 people had already split up to pounce on Rinpochian and the others. "One more person. That little girl is very powerful," Qing Yun's sword hurriedly reminded. However, out of the 18 spirit wheel experts, 3 were already dead. Another 3 were sent to attack Rinpoche and the others. The remaining people were facing the Empress, who was in full combat mode, and the pressure was even greater. Lin Xiaola, who was in a daze, suddenly opened her eyes. Her pupils turned vertical and emitted a dangerous glint. She turned into a gust of wind and disappeared. The numerous earth wheel experts below also formed a formation, forming an inner and outer circle that encompassed everyone in the field. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan stood at the side anxiously, but they couldn't help and could only stomp their feet. Ren Baqian finally woke up after a short period of unconsciousness. His eyes were filled with confusion. Who hit me? There was a round bump on his forehead that was bright red, making him look like a unicorn. After a long time, he came back to his senses and asked, "Who hit me just now?" Qing Yuan and Hong Luan turned to look at him before turning back again. "Do you want me to tell you that it was Her Majesty? Although it was indeed Her Majesty, we won't tell you." Rinpoche touched his forehead, grimaced in pain, and cursed, "Damn it! Bastard!" Qing Yuan and Hong Luan looked at him again before turning back again. They were wondering if they should tell Her Majesty about how Principal Ren had cursed them. Both of them were very loyal. Rinpoche cursed and looked up at the field. He saw the Empress fighting with more than 10 people. From time to time, someone would spit out blood and fly away, but they would force themselves to join the fight. In less than 2 minutes, the Empress turned over and slapped the top of someone's head, causing his entire head to be smashed into his chest. There were 11 people left in the field. On the other hand, Lin Xiaola was fighting with the 3 of them. The 3 of them had more or less scratches on their bodies. Lin Xiaola's abdomen, which was exposed between her tube top and short skirt, had a hole pierced through it. Lin Xiaola, who always gave people the impression that she was always sleepy and harmless, finally bared her fangs at this moment. Her face was full of murderous intent as she locked onto the 3 people and treated them as her prey. Surrounding them were the 2 sets of formations that they had been practicing earlier, and they were encircling everyone, including himself. Bang, bang, bang. Another 3 dull sounds of bodies colliding with each other were heard. Another spirit wheel expert died under the Empress's fists. At the same time, Shan Ro was pulled to the front by a ribbon and kicked in the chest. Her entire chest caved in, and she kept spitting out blood in the air. Another 3-inch-long wound appeared on the Empress's leg, and blood flowed continuously. At this moment, the Empress's eyes had turned completely red, and the veins on her body seemed to have solidified. Her aura was even stronger than before she was injured. This made everyone tremble in fear. After all, the current Qi Zixiao didn't feel like a human at all, but more like a ferocious beast that had awakened from ancient times. Even in the face of so many spirit wheel experts, she was still able to suppress them. Since the start of the battle, at least 3 people had died and 2 were seriously injured. It was unknown whether Shan Ro could survive. Excluding the other 3, there were still 10 people in the field. The most important thing was that they didn't know how long she could continue in this state. Life and death battles were extremely fierce, and life and death could be decided in an instant. If she continued in this state for another 15 minutes, there would be no one left alive. The more people died, the less people were left. The greater the pressure, the faster the collapse. Everyone understood this principle. Qing Yun's sword understood what everyone was thinking. Even he thought, it's hard to match a human's strength. How can a human be so strong? How strong are those who are stronger than her? This kind of thinking. However, at this moment, he couldn't allow this kind of emotion to grow in everyone. He shouted, "She can't hold on in this state for long. Heavenly Star Formation, gather." Following his shout, the inner formation started to change and shrink in size. He was prepared to use the formation to exhaust the Empress's strength. Rinpoche looked at the Empress worriedly. He didn't know how long she could hold on. After all, he didn't understand the situation of these people. He was only a man-will expert. Then he silently opened the box that Lin Xiaola had been holding, revealing dozens of fortified smoke grenades inside. Chapter 463. Previously, Qin Yun Sword divided the Earth Wheel experts into two groups, and one of them formed the Heavenly Stars Formation. This formation was divided into 5 parts, namely the Qi, Ji, Hui, Shan, and Exterminate sections. Each section had 36 people, and each section was an individual formation. In other words, each section could be used to form a separate formation against the enemy, and the 5 sections combined to form a large formation. Renbaqian wasn't in the formation and wasn't very clear about the specifics. According to what he heard, this formation was specially designed to trap people. Even if Qin Yun Sword was trapped in the formation, it would be difficult for him to escape. The Moon Plate formation was divided into 6 sections, and each section could launch an attack equivalent to the strength of a Spirit Wheel expert. This formation was equivalent to having 6 more Spirit Wheel experts. When the 6 sections combined, they could launch an attack that was far superior to that of a Spirit Wheel expert. However, this formation was only good at long-range attacks. If one was forced into the formation, it would automatically become chaotic. If 6 people were forced into the 6 sections at the same time, the formation would naturally collapse. These 2 formations were specially prepared by Qin Yun Sword for the Empress. Following Qin Yun Sword's orders, the people in the Heavenly Stars formation divided into 5 sections and surrounded the crowd. Each section had 36 people, and as the crowd closed in, the gap between the 2 sections became smaller and smaller until the 5 sections were connected together to form a large formation. Renbaqian looked back and saw that one of the sections was right behind him. The 36 people were constantly changing positions, and Renbaqian even saw a few familiar faces among them. Everyone from the Golden Ring residence fixed their eyes on him. Renbaqian was sent to the hidden village by the people from the Golden Ring residence, so the Golden Ring residence was inextricably involved. At this moment, no one cared about this matter in the midst of a great battle. After this battle, someone would definitely bring it up, and the Golden Ring residents would have to give everyone an explanation. The best explanation was to kill Renbaqian. Although the Heavenly Stars formation was used to trap people, it could also kill people, just that it wasn't as powerful as the Moon Plate formation. If Renbaqian stood in place and didn't move, he would be sucked into the formation, killed, or trapped inside when the 5 sections combined. However, those Spirit Wheel experts were fighting. Even though they were controlling their strength and making it more concentrated, every punch and sword strike would create a large pit or deep ravine in the ground. If Renbaqian were to get caught up in the fight, he was afraid that the aftermath of the fight would cause him to die without a burial place, even without the help of others. If he moved, the top would be blocked and he could only retreat downward, which would still result in death. Fortunately, I made some preparations beforehand. Renbaqian heaved a sigh of relief. He took out a smoke grenade from the box and tossed it in his hand. After estimating the distance, he threw the smoke grenade along the side of the mountain. It landed right in front of everyone. Renbaqian was worried that it wasn't powerful enough, so he threw another one before looking up anxiously. Be careful of poison. When everyone saw the white smoke coming out of the strange-looking thing that Renbaqian had thrown over, they immediately held their breaths, and their formation was slightly disrupted. Then, an indescribable, unimaginable, and unbearable stench began to drift along with the smoke, drilling directly into people's noses. Everyone held their breath as they passed through the smoke. The moment they took a breath, they felt as if their heads had been smashed by a sledgehammer. A foul stench rushed into their nostrils, causing them to see stars. They even used their hands to choke their throats, making it difficult for them to breathe. Tears flowed down his cheeks uncontrollably. No one had ever thought that they would actually cry because of the stench. But it really happened. Everyone was surrounded by the stench. When they passed through the smoke, the stench had stuck to their bodies. Even now, the stench was still drifting in the air. Plop. A few people immediately fainted from suffocation under such a strong stench. Even if it was poison, the resistance of an Earth Wheel expert wasn't low. Even with the sarin gas that Renbaqian had used before, an Earth Wheel expert could hold on for a longer time and even escape. However, this stench that was beyond everyone's understanding went straight to their heads. It was as if a sledgehammer had been swung around and knocked on their heads. It was also as if someone had stuffed 20 years of old feces into their noses and mouths. Even these earth wheel experts couldn't withstand the dual attributes of the spiritual and physical attributes. Poison, it's poison. Kill him and get the antidote. Someone started to vomit halfway through his sentence. Wretch. Following his voice, everyone started to vomit one after another. As they vomited, they subconsciously ran toward the side where the air was fresher. Not everyone could crawl around in a pit of shit that had been sealed for decades. This was even more unbearable than death. However, wherever they ran, the stench would follow. The biggest characteristic of this stench was its adhesiveness. Although it still carried a stench that made people want to vomit, the fresh air made everyone feel better. At least, they could barely breathe, but it felt like they were pouring feces into their mouths with every breath. It wasn't ordinary feces, but concentrated and enhanced feces. There were still a few people who were stronger. They forcibly resisted the urge to vomit and ran toward Rinpoche. They had to make this bastard give them the antidote. Run! Rinpoche saw that the fortified smoke grenades couldn't stop them and quickly ran down the mountain. However, apart from the spirit wheel experts fighting, there was also a large formation. Where could they run to? He stuffed the box into Qin Yuan's hands, took out a smoke grenade, and threw it toward the earth wheel experts who were forming a formation in the distance. Wretch! A total of more than a dozen smoke grenades were thrown, and the two formations that were originally formed collapsed. A breeze blew past. Rinpoche's eyes widened, and his head almost fell to the ground. It was simply too smelly. It was an indescribable stench. It was as if 1,000 rubber tires were piled up and burning around him, suffocating him and making him unable to breathe. Even if he held his breath, this stench would go straight to his brain and make him burst into tears. Canned herring? Rinpoche felt that he would rather eat canned herring every day than smell this stench. How could man-made edible food compare to the prehistoric power of heaven and earth? There was no comparison at all. Rinpoche's face turned green. He vomited as he ran, smelling the stench that came from all directions. This scream came from the spirit wheel expert that Lin Xiaola was fighting. Lin Xiaola was lying on his back with one of her legs twisted into the shape of a fried dough twist. Her hands were tightly locked onto his arms, and her teeth were firmly biting into his neck. As the spirit wheel expert struggled, a large piece of flesh was torn off by Lin Xiaola. A breeze blew past, and Lin Xiaola screamed like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She kicked the back of the spirit wheel expert with one leg and jumped about 3 meters into the air. There's poison. Hold your breath. The other two spirit wheel experts with claw marks on their faces smelled the stench and immediately blacked out. If Lin Xiaola had seized the opportunity at this moment, it wouldn't have been a problem for her to kill at least one more person. However, at this moment, she was even more miserable than the other two. She kept screaming in the air as her tears flowed like a river. Her sense of smell was originally stronger than that of a human's, and this stench was several times more harmful to her. She almost fainted. After landing on the ground, she immediately turned into a gust of wind and looked around for a less smelly place. In the end, she directly collided with Rinpoche, causing him to tumble. Lin Xiaola fell to the ground and couldn't stop wailing. Her sorrow flowed like a river. On the other side, the Empress's eyes were originally covered with a layer of blood, and even her pupils had shrunk to the size of a needle tip. Waves of ruthless and murderous thoughts filled her mind, trying to drown her last trace of clarity. However, a breeze blew past, and the Empress's pupils instantly dilated. Her body disappeared from the crowd like lightning. It was so smelly that her vision turned black. She had never smelled such a stench in her entire life. The extreme stench woke her up in an instant, but she would rather not wake up. It wasn't only her, but the others also didn't smell it. All of their faces turned green, and they held their breaths. They wanted to vomit but didn't dare to. Once they vomited, they would definitely inhale. The scene quieted down in an instant. The Empress landed beside Rinpoche and wanted to speak, But before she could speak, she covered her mouth first. At this moment, Rinpoche's face was also green. It was too smelly, and he was about to suffocate. He didn't expect the added ingredients to be so powerful. He gestured to the Empress with one hand and dragged Lin Xiaola, who had fallen to the ground, with the other. The Empress pulled Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan along. In the next second, everyone disappeared from the scene. All that was left behind was a stench that made it hard for everyone to breathe. When the crowd outside saw that Qi Zixiao and the others had suddenly disappeared, they were surprised and dispersed to a distant place with better air circulation, maintaining their encirclement. They didn't believe that Qi Zixiao had disappeared just like that. However, the stench followed them like a maggot attached to a bone. No matter where they went, they could smell it. Wretch! After another half a day, everyone discovered a terrifying fact. Even bathing couldn't wash away the stench from their bodies. Chapter 464. As soon as everyone returned to Earth, the Empress went straight to her room to take a bath. It was too smelly, and she couldn't stand the stench anymore. Rinpoche, Lin Xiaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Yuan vomited all over the floor. Wretch! The sound of vomiting echoed throughout the house. Lin Xiaola was vomiting and crying at the same time. She cried and vomited at the same time. She was heartbroken. She had never suffered such a serious injury in her life. The stench was even more damaging to her than having a hole in her abdomen and legs twisted into a fried dough twist. This place is wretch. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan asked while vomiting. Follow me, wretch. Rinpoche vomited as he dragged Lin Xiaola to the swimming pool and threw her in. Lin Xiaola immediately jumped out after falling into the water. She didn't seem to like water, but when she smelled the stench on the shore, she cried and jumped back in again. She held the edge of the swimming pool tightly. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan didn't need Rinpoche's instructions. They jumped into the pool themselves and wanted to wash off the stench. Rinpoche threw them into the swimming pool and felt suffocated. He quickly ran back to his room to take a bath. After half an hour, all kinds of screams and the Empress's angry roars could be heard from all over the house. He couldn't wash off the stench even after taking a bath. Rinpoche shuddered as he tried his best to wash off the stench on his body. The Empress's voice seemed to be very angry. Would she vent her anger on him? After thinking about it carefully, the Empress didn't seem to need to vent her anger on him since he was one of the main culprits. However, there were a few people in front of him. They were the ones who made the smoke grenades and gave them to him. Bang! Hearing the loud noise from the Empress's room, Rinpoche ran out naked to check on his phone to see if there was anything that could remove the concentrated skunk musk. Before he could find anything, the Empress rushed in with a bath towel wrapped around her. She didn't even look at him and rushed straight into the bathroom, leaving a dumbfounded Rinpoche behind. He went to the Empress's room to take a look and heard the sound of water splashing as soon as he entered. Rinpoche looked out and saw that the shower in the bathroom had been dismantled by the Empress into a pile of parts. This showed how angry the Empress was at this moment. Rinpoche hurriedly gave Yang Sen a call. It was this damned fellow who gave him that batch of things. What he wanted was something powerful that could save the situation at a critical moment. This thing was indeed very powerful, much more powerful than he had expected. However, the side effects were also very powerful, much more powerful than he had expected. This was simply perishing together with the enemy. How do I wash away the smell of that thing? Rinpoche asked while gritting his teeth. You're infected? Yang Sen asked. How do we wash it off? Rinpoche flew into a rage. Didn't I tell you last time? Time will solve everything. I want it now. I'm going to suffocate. Rinpoche said fiercely. He was really going to suffocate. Even after such a long time, his nose still hadn't gotten used to this smell. It was constantly being attacked both physically and mentally. You can try vinegar, detergent, and tomatoes, Yang Sen said. After he finished speaking, Rinpoche hung up the phone. Yang Sen put down the phone and laughed. He finally saw that guy suffer a setback. Just like what he said, time would solve everything. At least in the laboratory, there wasn't a good solution. This damned smell could only be solved with time. Even ordinary skunk musk was very difficult to remove and required more than 3 days, let alone this concentrated one. Its power was increased by several times. The duration was also, after he called Shen Feng, the Empress appeared in front of him in a bathrobe and retreated to the door in disgust. The smell on Rinpoche's body was too strong. Of course, it was the same for her. However, when the two of them were together, the smell seemed to be much stronger. The Empress's eyes were red. How can I get rid of the smell? She didn't even care about the excruciating pain she felt after recovering from that state. Your Majesty, please wait for a moment. I have already sent someone to deliver the things, Rinpoche said. He prayed that those things would be useful. He felt that the Empress was going crazy. Who did it? The Empress's eyes were red and overflowing with murderous intent. She had made up her mind that she wouldn't let that guy die too easily. She definitely wouldn't let him die an easy death. She must suppress him in front of the palace for thousands of years. Rinpoche was speechless. Your Majesty, let's talk about this after the smell is washed off. Why don't you go in and soak for a while? At least you will feel better after soaking in the water. After the Empress left, Rinpoche heaved a sigh of relief. The Empress was going crazy. If she found out that he was the one who did it, he would probably be in big trouble. Who knew that this thing was so powerful? After all, he had only heard about it and hadn't experienced it personally. He definitely couldn't understand the feeling of being surrounded by this kind of stench. An hour later, Shen Feng opened the door and quickly retreated as if she was struck by lightning. She left the 2 boxes in front of Rinpoche's door, quickly escaped to the car, and gave Rinpoche a call. Rinpoche quickly took out the boxes and divided the contents into 3 parts: the Empress, himself, and Lin Xiaola. After an hour, Rinpoche sadly discovered that these things were useless. Boom. The bricks in front of Rinpoche were sent flying. Lin Xiaola rushed in with red and teary eyes and clawed at Rinpoche's face. Bastard! I'll fight it out with you. Lin Xiaola finally knew that this bastard was the culprit. Boom, boom. There were 2 consecutive loud noises. The Empress broke through the wall of Rinpoche's bathroom and sent Lin Xiaola flying with a punch. Overflowing with murderous intent, she said, "If you hit him, I'll kill you first. I'm going to fight it out with that bastard. It's all that bastard's doing." Upon hearing this, the murderous Empress's face immediately darkened. She looked at Rinpoche coldly and asked, "You did it?" Rinpoche immediately broke out in a cold sweat. "Your Majesty, I've sweated for the country. I've bled for the front line." 5 minutes later, Rinpoche had a big bump on his head and claw marks all over his face. He was wearing only a pair of underpants and was tied up and hung outside the window. He wondered if he should give up on young Senator. Thinking about the consequences, he was afraid that the Messier 87 department would be massacred by the Empress. Forget it, it was better to bear it himself. Otherwise, something big would definitely happen. Who asked him to be stubborn? He was a stubborn person. This is life. After hanging outside the window for a day, Rinpoche felt that the smell wasn't that bad. It was just a little like the smell of rotting animal corpses soaked together with feces from the open-air toilets in summer. Although he had never smelled rotting animal corpses before, the smell made him feel like he was soaking in a pool filled with those things. Well, the smell was a little terrible. He recalled his lost youth while feeling nauseous. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard the window above him open. "Your Majesty, I've bled for the country. Everything I've done is for your Majesty." "Eh? Your Majesty? What's in your hand? Where did you get the whip from?" On Mount Wu, an old man was sitting cross-legged on a rock by the stream. "Master, I've brought you medicine and a change of clothes," 2 young disciples shouted from afar. "Come over and talk. Why are you standing so far away?" The old man opened his eyes and a glint flashed across them. "Master, this is fine." The 2 disciples smiled awkwardly. Previously, the 2 of them didn't take it seriously and almost fainted. After experiencing it once, the 2 of them really didn't want to experience it again. Public morals are degenerating with each passing day. A trace of sorrow flashed across the old man's face. Wasn't it just a little smelly? Just as he thought of this, A gust of wind blew past, and his stomach churned again. Ugh. There were many people who had the same experience as him. One had to know that those who were afflicted were at least at the earthwheel level. Almost all of them were old experts or higher-ups from various sections. When had they ever encountered such an encounter, smelled such a stench, and suffered like this? This smell had exceeded the limits of what humans could tolerate. Killing people was just a matter of nodding one's head to the ground. Now, with this stench on their bodies, the wind could blow for 300 meters. Not to mention others, even their own disciples weren't willing to be near them. Even they despised themselves. Chapter 465. In the villa, Rinpochen, the Empress, Lin Xiaola, Qing Yuan, and Hong Wan each wore a gas mask. This was the idea that Rinpochen came up with after being beaten up. The two sides of the mask were covered with activated charcoal that could filter out some of the odor. Although it couldn't completely eliminate the stench, it could reduce it by half. In addition, the smell had lessened over the past few days, and they were more or less used to it. As a result, they didn't feel so bad anymore. Except for Lin Xiaola, who was still crying from time to time. It wasn't that she wanted to cry, but that the smell made her cry uncontrollably as if her tear ducts had been stimulated. Your Majesty, we will go back in the afternoon. I don't know if they are still outside. How is Her Majesty's recovery? Rinpochien's voice sounded a little muffled when he spoke through the mask. According to his calculations, by the time they returned, Shiwanya would be almost there, at most half a day to a day later. Therefore, it was hard to say whether they would see the experts from Tianjin Basin or Shiwanya. Even if I have half of my strength left, they still can't fight against me, the Empress said casually with great confidence in herself. But Your Majesty, you don't even have half of your strength now, Lin Xiaola said faintly while crying. Lin Xiaola said faintly while crying. Those who didn't know would think that she was very sad. In fact, she was really sad, so sad that her tears formed a river. These days, she couldn't eat or sleep well, and her originally flat figure became even flatter. After a few days of tears, there was a large red patch around her eyes, similar to a walnut. The Empress glared at her coldly. Your Majesty? Rinpochen was shocked. He really didn't know that the Empress's strength had been greatly reduced. The Empress's wounds had almost healed over the past few days, and even Lin Xiaola's twisted legs were mostly healed due to her strong recovery ability. However, the burden on her body from burning her essence blood couldn't be recovered in a short period of time. I'm fine. I will be fine after a few days of rest, the Empress said indifferently. What if they are still there when we return? Rinpochen couldn't help but worry. If the Empress was in good condition, it would be a tough fight against 11 Spirit Wheel experts and more than 500 Earth Wheel experts with Lin Xiaola's help. If the Empress's strength wasn't even half of her peak, it would be somewhat dangerous. My strength isn't something you can measure, the Water Empress said coldly. This sentence included all the experts in Tianjin Basin, including Rinpochen and Lin Xiaola. I don't know about other things, but Your Majesty, you only have 30% of your strength left. Lin Xiaola continued to cry and yawn as she exposed the Empress's past. The Empress's face darkened. She glared at Lin Xiaola, clenched her teeth, and really wanted to slap her to death. Rinpochen didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Why are you still so stubborn at this juncture? Your Majesty, there are still some added smoke bombs. Rinpochen cautiously suggested. For the sake of these damned smoke bombs, the Empress had been looking at him in exasperation these past 2 days. If it was someone else, they would have been slapped to death by her. How dare you? The Empress's eyes were filled with murderous intent. Lin Xiaola immediately jumped up from the ground. Your Majesty, please be patient for the sake of your safety. Besides, don't you have a gas mask now? I'd rather die. The Empress exuded a murderous aura. Your Majesty, think about your unborn child. Bang! Rinpochen used a lot of effort to get down from the wall. His gas mask was broken and stuck to his face. Without the gas mask, Rinpoche felt that the stench in the room immediately became stronger. After half a day, Rinpoche was shot into the wall 6 times. This finally made the Empress soften a little. She gritted her teeth and tearfully acquiesced to Rinpoche's plan to bring the remaining smoke bombs with him and use them if the situation became dangerous. With her pride, she acquiesced to Rinpoche's plan because she was a little soft-hearted after seeing Rinpoche's bloody nose and swollen face. On the other hand, Lin Xiaola was grinding her teeth and had the intention to bite Rinpoche to death. However, what comforted everyone was that there was still a gas mask that could reduce the stench by half. This comfort came from Rinpoche's words. You and your opponent fell into a pit filled with hot feces. You have a gas mask, but your opponent doesn't. What a blessing! The strength of both parties is also at an equal level. After all, the power of this smoke bomb isn't weaker than any biological weapon of mass destruction. Of course, the price was that Rinpoche was shot into the wall for the 6th time. There was a reason why Rinpoche was shot into the wall 6 times. Early morning, Wu City. Since yesterday, there had been an unbearable stench in Wu City. Especially this morning, this stench had reached its peak. The entire warlord's residence was surrounded by this stench, which was like a mixture of rotting corpses and hot feces. The guards and maids in the warlord's residence were about to faint. Damn it, I can't take it anymore, someone cursed. If you think about it, it won't be there. If you think about it, it will naturally come. Another old man's identity as an expert didn't last long. The stench has weakened a little, but it should be better in a few days. Why do I feel that it's heavier? It's because there are too many people here. When we catch that bastard, we must skin him and hang him on the city wall to let him die under the scorching sun, someone said hatefully. Will Qi Zixiao come back? How did they disappear? Everyone was puzzled and couldn't find an answer. Qi Zixiao had disappeared for a day, and no one knew where she went. No one knew if she would return or how she did it. Let's think about how to deal with Shi Huanya first. If Qi Zixiao dies and Shi Huanya is annihilated here, the gate to Tianjin Basin will be opened. However, now that Qi Zixiao has disappeared and hasn't been seen for a day, we have to force Shi Huanya to retreat first before letting people search the entire Tianjin Basin. I don't believe that they really disappeared without a trace. The news of Shi Huanya entering Tianjin Basin with 3,000 soldiers naturally couldn't be hidden. Previously, everyone's thoughts were on Qi Zixiao and wanted to surround and kill her. Then, they would use her head to confuse Shi Huanya's army and defeat the other party. However, at this time, Qi Zixiao was missing and Shi Huanya's army had broken through several obstacles at a speed that exceeded everyone's expectations and was approaching Wu City. Everyone had to face this problem, which was also the reason why they gathered here. After 2 hours, everyone finally finished their discussion and fled. With so many people gathered in one place, the stench was enough to make one's vision go dark. They wanted to search for Qi Zixiao, keep people on Mount Wu, and stop Shi Huanya's troops. However, the main problem was the army led by Shi Huanya. Only the fastest spirit wheel expert and dozens of earth wheel experts were left on Mount Wu to monitor and prevent Qi Zixiao from appearing. However, everyone didn't have high hopes for this. Perhaps Qi Zixiao was already thousands of kilometers away. Chapter 466. This day wasn't a good memory for the people of Wu City. That was because a pungent stench that made people want to vomit could be smelled from every corner of the city since the morning, causing many of the citizens of Wu City to silently curse. Only a few people knew that this stench was brought back by the experts who came down from Mount Wu. However, no one dared to say anything. After all, each of those experts was a well-known figure in Tianjin Basin. The North Alliance, the Southern Metropolis, the Green Bellflower, the Lingshan Sect, the Golden Ring Residence. These people covered all the major powers in Tianjin Basin. Therefore, if those who knew didn't say anything, ordinary people wouldn't know what exactly happened. It wasn't until the afternoon that everyone in Wu City could feel the earth trembling. Standing on the city wall, one could see a large number of cavalrymen flooding toward Wu City along the dirt road outside the city like a tide. When they sensed the tremors coming from the ground, many experts immediately appeared from all over the city. They either walked through the crowd or scurried on the rooftops to reach the city wall. Wretch! When a group of people gathered together, the originally faint stench immediately became extremely strong. You guys stay here. I'm getting old and will go back to rest first. Goodbye. Many people left one after another. Most of those who left were experts who lived in seclusion, and those who stayed were people from the major powers. There were also the soldiers who almost fainted on the city wall. They held their breaths and occasionally inhaled a mouthful of fresh air that was filled with the smell while looking into the distance with a black face. After half an hour, the tide finally stopped a few kilometers away from Wu City. Everyone could almost see the faces of the cavalrymen in front of them. They were tall and fierce-looking Aboriginal warriors who were half-dressed and had strong upper bodies. However, they couldn't hide the fatigue on their faces, and there were many new wounds on their bodies. In 9.5 days, they rushed from Gu City to Wu City and broke through 5 interceptions during this period. A few flags embroidered with the words Nan Fu and Shi fluttered among the troops. As soon as the troops stopped, the cavalrymen dispersed to both sides. A general riding on a saber-toothed tiger came to the front of the formation and looked up at the people on the city wall. Just by sitting on the saber-toothed tiger's back, one could feel a bloody and murderous aura. Everyone felt as if they were on a battlefield, surrounded by a sea of blood and facing a man who was like a god of death. Shiwanya. The people on the city wall immediately recognized him. Although many people hadn't seen him face to face, they immediately recognized him. In Rinpoche's eyes, Shiwanya had a square face and was a handsome Aboriginal. However, in the eyes of the people of Tianjin Basin, he was a butcher with a butcher's knife. Where's her? Shiwanya's voice was like thunder, spanning several miles and covering the entire northern part of Wu City. Qi Zixiao is dead and Deyo is about to perish. Aren't you all going back to prepare for your funeral? Qingyun's sword said in a clear voice. Since Qi Zixiao was nowhere to be found, they would first disrupt the enemy's morale and lure them into attacking the city. Then they would kill Shiwanya and his cavalry outside of Wu City. Fu Hiyunt, he said, he would say the Qing. Once they were out of Tianjin Basin, half of the south of Deyo would be in chaos. With the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation as support, the barbarians would definitely be badly battered. As soon as he finished speaking, Shiwanya's murderous aura erupted like a volcano eruption. The murderous aura was so concentrated that it was almost tangible. With him as the center, it swept out in all directions. The cavalrymen behind him retreated one after another, and their mounts couldn't even stand steadily. Even the people on the city wall were secretly shocked. Rest for half an hour. Break into the city, slaughter everyone, and leave no one alive. Shiwanya's thunderous voice resounded throughout the world. Kill! The cavalrymen behind him were overflowing with murderous aura as they shouted. Then, they dismounted and seized the time to rest. Where's Her Majesty? Shiwanya's voice sounded again. How could there be a corpse left after killing an expert like Qi Zixiao? There's nothing left of him. Qingyun's sword said, You scum and trash. How could you harm Her Majesty? However, since you dared to say that you would kill Her Majesty, none of you will be spared. The blood of the whole city will be the price for your words. Shiwanya's voice was full of contempt. What kind of person was Her Majesty? How could she be harmed by these people? He didn't believe Qingyun's sword's words at all. These people dared to say such words, which was the greatest insult to Her Majesty. They would die for insulting Her Majesty. Slaughter the whole city as a warning to others and let everyone see the consequences. They would kill them first and then slowly search for Her Majesty's whereabouts. In addition, Rinpoche had sent a letter saying that all the experts of Tianjin Basin were gathered here. After killing them, Tianjin Basin would no longer have the power to rebel. As for Her Majesty's safety, all the experts of Tianjin Basin were gathered here. As long as they were killed, who else could harm Her Majesty? As a general, Shiwanya wasn't the kind of person who could foresee everything. As the Protector General of the South, he wasn't able to see through people's minds. He had his own way of dealing with the enemy and controlling them. Naturally, there wouldn't be any mistakes after killing all the people who could pose a threat and have the ability to rebel. Shi Wanya's words were exactly what everyone in the city wanted. All the experts of Tianjing Basin were gathered in the city. There were 10 spirit wheel experts, 500 earth wheel experts, and more than 1,000 man wheel experts from various sections. Facing Shi Wanya, who had come from afar, and defending the city with such strength, they would bleed to death at the top of the city wall. Both sides had absolute confidence in their own strength and were determined to kill each other. After half an hour, without waiting for Shi Wanya's order, many of the cavalrymen at the back stood up and gripped their weapons tightly. All of them were silent. Other than the sound of weapons colliding, there was almost no other sound. Slaughter them all! Shi Wanya waved his hand. Kill! Many soldiers roared, grabbed their weapons, and rushed toward the city wall. In addition to the weapons in their hands, everyone was carrying a bone spear. This was something that Rinpoche hadn't seen before in the war in the north. Throw! Buzz! More than 2,000 people threw their bone spears at the same time, making a loud noise. A large number of bone spears reflected the sunlight and covered the top of the city wall like a cloud. Boom! A huge umbrella unfolded in front of the bone spears. Hundreds of bone spears immediately hit the umbrella and turned into countless broken bones. Qingyun's sword pointed his finger, and the long sword behind him floated in the air, sprinkling countless sword gleams onto the bone spears. Dozens of figures rushed into the sky and blocked the bone spears with dazzling sword gleams and sword gleams. Stubborn resistance. Shi Wanya snorted coldly, took the long-handled broadsword from the back of the saber-toothed tiger, and suddenly disappeared. After a few flashes, Shi Wanya jumped up with an overbearing sword gleam in his hand. It was as if he was going to split the heaven and earth apart. A figure that faced the bone spear immediately exploded into flesh and blood that filled the sky. At the same time, 2 other people's auras soared into the sky, leaped from behind the cavalrymen, and rushed toward the top of the city wall. 3 cardinal heaven experts from the Protectorate of the South attacked at the same time. On Mount Wu, there was a fluctuation in the air where the Empress and the others had disappeared. 3 people wearing strange masks appeared out of thin air as if they had been squeezed out of it. Although they were wearing gas masks and had changed their clothes, the people who stayed on Wushan Mountain immediately discovered and recognized them. Chapter 467. Shi Wanya slashed with his saber, and a person in the air turned into a rain of blood. Qingyun's sword changed its direction, and the sword in the air seemed to transcend time and space and arrived in front of Shi Wanya in a few tenths of a second. Clang! Shi Wanya waved the long saber in his hand and parried the long sword that was flying towards him. The long sword seemed to be controlled by an invisible hand as it made a turn and attacked Shi Wanya again, creating many silver flowers in the air. Shi Wanya held the saber hilt in his hand, and a bright light flashed in the air again. The silver flowers in the air immediately disappeared. Only Shi Wanya held the saber on his back and descended toward the top of the city wall. Good move. I don't believe that you are more powerful than Qi Xiao. A voice shouted as a person rode a spear and turned into a long dragon that soared into the sky. There was a series of sounds of weapons colliding in the air, following which, a person was smashed into the ground, creating a big pit. Shi Wanya was also bounced up by the force of the collision. This famous butcher's face was as black as charcoal in the air. Although the strength of the person just now wasn't bad, it wasn't strength that was important. It was that he was too smelly. It was so smelly that even Shi Wanya couldn't help but want to curse. He even suspected that this person had soaked in the hot feces for an entire day just to disgust him. Were the spirit wheel experts of Tianjing Basin like this? When he landed, another 2 spirit wheel experts came up to meet him. Then, that fresh smell kept drilling into Shi Wanya's nose, making his face as black as the bottom of a pot. He couldn't help but want to curse. As for the Deputy Protector General of the Protectorate of the South and another general, they started cursing as soon as they started fighting. Did you fall into a cesspit? Are you trying to stink me to death? Upon hearing this, Shi Wanya's mind suddenly flashed. Could this be the reason why these spirit wheel experts from Tianjing Basin had the courage to fight against him? First, they made themselves smelly, then waited for them to get used to it before exchanging blows with them, greatly reducing their combat power. You are as despicable as insects and trash. Do you think this can stop my army? Shi Wanya said contemptuously. Even if you use such a despicable trick, my aboriginal army won't retreat. It will only make me look down on you. Shi Wanya's voice resonated in the air. It stinks to death. The other two were still cursing. The people of Tianjing Basin were almost angered to death by the scolding and Shi Wanya's words. All of them flew into a rage. It was obviously you bastards who did it. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan were left behind on Earth. After all, they might have to flee for their lives the next time they came back. One less of these burdens was one less. Ren Baqian stepped on the hard ground, and the scenery in front of him changed. He realized that he was back in Tianjing Basin. There were about a dozen people in the forest in the distance. It was a lot smaller than the hundreds of people who had left. There are still some left behind. I'll start with you. The Empress's voice came through the gas mask, and it sounded a little muffled. Her gaze was fixed on a dwarf who was standing on a rock in the distance. Before Ren Baqian could finish his sentence, the Empress's silhouette appeared in the sky. Her fist smashed down with the sound of breaking through the air. Unexpectedly, in a flash, the figure appeared in the distance and had no intention of fighting with the Empress. Cowardly as a mouse, the Empress said coldly. The dwarf wasn't angry. He grinned at the Empress, looked deeply at Ren Baqian and said, I will peel off your skin and soak it in the toilet. Come on up. Ren Baqian provoked with a smoke grenade in his hand. His posture was no different from holding a grenade bag and looking at death calmly. At most, they would perish together. Lin Xiaola looked at Ren Baqian with tears streaming down her face. Originally, she felt a little better. After all, she had been on Earth for 5 days, and the stench had lessened a lot. However, as soon as she returned, the strong stench made her feel unwell again. The dwarf had a toothache. That thing couldn't hurt anyone, but it was really too disgusting. The Empress didn't say a word. In a few flashes, she appeared in front of the dwarf and brazenly attacked. The dwarf didn't receive her attack at all and just kept running away. In a few moments, he had escaped into the forest, and there was a sudden rumbling sound in the forest. Large tracts of trees came crashing down with a loud creaking sound. A few unlucky earth wheel experts were also caught in the crossfire. With a punch from the Empress, all the bones in their bodies were shattered, and they fell to the ground dead. In a short period of time, the Empress had destroyed a small part of the forest, but she still couldn't catch up with the dwarf. After all, her strength had greatly decreased, and the dwarf was good at speed. Even though she was originally much stronger than the dwarf, she was helpless now. Seeing that she couldn't do anything to the dwarf, the Empress returned to Ren Baqian's side and asked, Where should we go? No one is here. I don't know if it's because Protector General Shi is here, Ren Baqian said. He had told the Empress about delivering a letter to Shi Wanya on Earth. Why don't we go up and take a look? Ren Baqian said. This position was halfway up the mountain, and the large forest below blocked the way to the foot of the mountain and Wu City. After Ren Baqian finished speaking, he felt his collar being lifted by someone. Then, a gust of wind blew against his face, causing him to be unable to open his eyes. When he regained his balance, he found himself on a huge rock that was almost at the peak of the mountain. The mountain wind messed up the Empress's hair and hit Ren Baqian's face, bringing with it a faint stench. This was really a sad story. Ren Baqian felt that this was definitely a dark history. If anyone dared to write it down in the history books, one day, the Empress and the king stood at the peak of Wu Mountain and observed the world as if they were looking at palm lines. The stench emitted from their bodies and dispersed with the wind, causing people to cover their noses. He reckoned that even the resurrection of the former Empress wouldn't be able to save him. The Empress would suppress him in the toilet for 10,000 years. It was said that the Empress, especially someone like the Empress, was always emitting a unique fragrance that made people feel relaxed and happy like a spring breeze. Speaking of which, the Empress was usually quite fragrant, and the faint fragrance on her body was very pleasant. It was a pity that she perished together with the enemy. Looking into the distance from a high place, the air in this world wasn't polluted. The visibility was extremely high, and everything in the distance could be seen at a glance. Ren Baqian almost immediately saw a black dot outside of Wu City. It was just a black dot here, but it should be a very large group of people nearby. It should be Protector General Shi who is attacking Wu City, Ren Baqian said after pondering for a while. It was a good thing that Shi Wanya had arrived earlier than he had expected. It must have been tough for them to arrive here so quickly. Upon hearing that Shi Wanya was here, the Empress nodded slightly. At the very least, Ren Baqian didn't need to use that kind of thing anymore. At the thought of this, the Empress heaved a sigh of relief from the bottom of her heart. It would be fine if it was the enemy, but it was her own army and her own generals. To the Empress, there was probably nothing worse than that smell. Even if it meant death. Your Majesty, let's rendezvous with Protector General Shi. Tianjing Basin will be stable after we get rid of all the experts here in one fell swoop, Ren Baqian said. After he finished speaking, a small bottle appeared in his hand. Your Majesty, this is perfume. It wouldn't be of much use if it was used in the past. However, it has been 5 days now, and the smell on my body has lessened a lot. Using this can at least cover up the smell on my body. Furthermore, I spent a lot of money to find someone to mix it. When combined with the previous stench, it will become another kind of floral fragrance. After this experience, Ren Baqian realized that the human sense of smell was very interesting. Fragrance and stench weren't absolute. For example, the smell of sh*T after being diluted was actually the fragrance of jasmine. This bottle of perfume was blended on this basis. The fainter stench on the body and the fragrance of the perfume blended together to form a kind of floral fragrance. Of course, Ren Baqian had to pay a hefty price to obtain such a thing in a short period of time. He spent 8 million yuan and had several top-notch perfumers working day and night to finally mix it after countless attempts. When the Empress heard this, she was immediately elated. Previously, she was still a little hesitant. It would be really embarrassing to meet her generals and troops with this damned stench on her body. Ren Baqian was indeed considerate. Chapter 468. The Empress happily sprayed perfume all over her body, took off her gas mask, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. She looked at Ren Baqian with an unfriendly gaze and asked, "Why do I smell like braised pork?" Ren Baqian was dumbfounded. Sniff. It's obviously night glory. It's the smell of braised pork. I've eaten it before. The Empress's face darkened as if she was being bullied by his ignorance. But I smell a strong fragrance. Ren Baqian felt that he had been wronged. Besides, the person who delivered the perfume had clearly said that it was the smell of night glory. It smells even worse. Lin Xiaola couldn't stop crying. Perhaps your Majesty's sense of smell is more sensitive than mine? After all, those perfumers are just ordinary people, and their sense of smell is definitely not as good as yours. Ren Baqian applied what he had learned on the spot. If it was a single smell, then everyone could smell it very similar. However, it was entirely possible for two different smells to be mixed according to one's sense of smell. However, there was a huge difference between braised pork and night glory. The Empress's face darkened again and again, and she heaved a sigh of relief after a long time. In any case, braised pork smelled better than before, but she was a little hungry. Clang. Shi Wanya's saber struck like a gale, and his opponent's weapon almost flew out of his hand, leaving his chest wide open. Shi Wanya's body spun and struck 3 times. With the help of his body's twisting force, each strike was faster and stronger than the previous one. The third strike was half as fast as the first, and the force was almost twice as strong. The spirit wheel experts on the other side were directly struck into the city. Qing Yun's sword was just about to rescue them when he suddenly felt an imposing aura soaring into the sky from afar and frowned. It was the aura of Qi Zixiao. She knew that Shi Wanya was here. Shi Wanya put his saber behind his back and looked into the distance. He then said coldly, "Let's call it a day. Wait for me tomorrow after you've washed up, lest you dirty my saber." Trying to leave? No way. Qing Yun's sword roared. His face turned red, and his body grew bigger. The sword in the air suddenly turned into thousands of swords that rained down from the sky and covered the entire city. The power of each flowing light sword was equivalent to the power of a casual blow from him. The Empress wasn't dead. If they allowed her to meet up with Shiwanya, they wouldn't stand a chance. As soon as he used the sword, he immediately became like a deflated balloon. His entire body emitted the smell of defeat, and the wrinkles on his face increased. It was as if he had aged 20 years, and his body was on the verge of collapse. "This is interesting." Shiwanya laughed out loud and dragged his long saber diagonally to the side of his body. The aura on his body surged as he violently waved his saber toward the sky. A huge snow-white saber light suddenly lit up the entire sky. This saber light seemed to split the sky in half. The people near the city walls could even hear the sound of cloth tearing. That was the sound of the saber tearing through the air. The sword rain in the sky collided with the huge saber light. The sword light shattered one after another, and the saber light seemed to have encountered some kind of obstruction. A strong wind swept out in all directions, and some people couldn't stand still and retreated. However, when the hundreds of sword lights shattered, the saber lights became dimmer and dimmer. Finally, they suddenly cracked open like glass. The remaining hundreds of sword lights swarmed down and headed straight for Shiwanya. Subsequently, the saber lights clashed with the sword lights in the sky. After a loud bang, the entire city wall was forcefully smashed down by a 5-meter-wide section. When the dust settled, Shiwanya was seen standing there with traces of blood seeping out of his body. Not bad. Shiwanya looked in the direction of Qing Yun's sword with a look of admiration. This was the greatest reward he could give to his enemy. However, when Qing Yun's sword saw this scene, he spat out another mouthful of blood and looked even more defeated. Even this sword couldn't do anything to the other party. Qi Zixiao was so powerful, and so was Shiwanya. The talents of the aboriginals were really enviable, to the point of despair. "Retreat and follow me to welcome Her Majesty into the camp," Shiwanya said in a clear voice. At this moment he felt a trace of warning in his heart. He turned his head and saw an old man holding a paper umbrella standing there and looking at him. The old man's aura was faintly discernible, but that paper umbrella made him feel a little frightened. Chang Tian looked at Shiwanya and smiled. "It seems like I have learned a lot in this lifetime, but I have actually only learned one move. Come and take a look." "All right." Shiwanya nodded. The long saber in his hand was no longer dragged by his side, but slanted in front of his chest. He also had a solemn look on his face. "I'm afraid I can't fulfill my promise to you," Chang Tian said as he turned his head and looked at an old woman in the distance. "I remember that you like beautiful flowers. They are yellow and have a very pleasant smell." Chang Tian thought to himself but didn't say it out loud. "Chang Tian." The old woman's expression changed. Chang Tian smiled at her and turned his head to look at Shiwanya. His expression became solemn as he stared at the paper umbrella erected between his eyebrows. His heart was calm and devout, as if he was doing the most solemn thing to the gods. He poured all his attention into the umbrella, and then his whole body flashed and leaped hundreds of meters. He was still holding a paper umbrella in his hand, but in everyone's eyes, it was a long spear. Everyone could only see this spear, as if there was nothing else in the world except for this spear. It was as if this spear had existed since the beginning of the world and was only seen now. This was a spear that could pierce through the world. As fast as a meteor? Even faster than a meteor. It was so fast that Shiwanya only saw a figure flash before the tip of the spear appeared in front of him. The tip of the spear occupied his entire vision. His heart was beating wildly. This was an extreme crisis. All Shiwanya could do was block the spear with his saber and block this sure-kill spear. Ding! When the spear and the saber collided, there was only a soft sound, as if a nail had fallen to the ground. Shiwanya looked down and saw that a paper umbrella had pierced through the saber and his body. Fresh blood dyed the white surface of the umbrella red, just like a painting of a red plum blossom in the snow that he had once seen. "Protector General!" the crowd in the distance shouted. The other two spirit wheel experts rushed over but were entangled by others. "Not bad. It's a pity that it's still a little short." Shiwanya raised his head and grinned at Chang Tian. His smile was full of the smell of blood. "What a pity." Chang Tian was slightly regretful and disappointed. Just now, when Shiwanya's saber came into contact with the spear, he lifted it slightly to the side, which caused Chang Tian's spear to miss. It was precisely this slight deviation that allowed Shiwanya to avoid a vital point. "What's your name?" Shiwanya asked seriously. This spear strike was worth remembering. Chang Tian, which means everything is impermanent, and Tian, which means lawless, Chang Tian replied softly. "I remember." Shiwanya nodded and asked, "Does this spear strike have a name?" "Nameless. This spear strike shall be named Nameless." Chang Tian and John Doe. Shiwanya laughed as he spat out blood from his mouth and retreated. When he pulled the umbrella out of his body, blood spurted out from the wound on his back. "Retreat!" Shiwanya shouted. The aboriginal army left behind some corpses and dispersed like the tide. Chang Tian. The old woman in the distance rushed to Chang Tian's side. He maintained his previous posture with a smile on his face and his eyes looking into the distance as if he was looking at the world that he was born and raised in. Chapter 469. The sound of iron hooves could be heard as a group of cavalrymen approached like a black dragon crouching on the ground. They stopped not far from the Empress. "Your Majesty, please forgive us for being late." Shiwanya jumped down from the saber-toothed tiger and bowed. Just as he spoke, he spat out a mouthful of blood. The injuries on his body had been treated on the way here. Although he had just avoided a fatal shot, his internal organs were also severely injured. It was already amazing that he could come to see the Empress. "Greetings, Your Majesty." More than 2,000 cavalrymen got down from their mounts and bowed in unison. "Why are you so miserable?" The Empress frowned when she saw Shiwanya's miserable appearance. "I witnessed a spear technique, but I'm afraid I won't be able to see it in the future," Shiwanya said as he spat out blood. That person had used all his energy to unleash this fatal shot. No matter what, he would definitely die after this shot. This shot had become the final shot. "There's such a person?" The Empress was a little surprised. She wanted to see an expert who could injure Shiwanya so badly. Renbachian found a few familiar figures behind the cavalrymen. These people were dressed in ordinary clothes and were very different from the soldiers. It was hard to spot them in the crowd, but they kept jumping around as if they were afraid that he wouldn't see them. The great elder's youngest son, Shurgan, Du Laolu, Su Peng, the gluttonous student who used the Katsura fruits to exchange for sweets, and a few others. Renbachian waved his hand. "Yagwe, I told you that you could see us." Du Laolu acted as if he had won a prize. Renbachian squinted his eyes and looked over. These children had too little homework. "Teacher," Shurgan hurriedly said, "why are you in the group? Have you seen Tong Lan and the rest?" It was a coincidence that Shurgan's group met Shiwanya. After all, when they saw a large group of cavalrymen in Tianjing Basin, they immediately knew that something had happened and hurriedly joined the cavalry. Shiwanya also felt that it wasn't safe to let them wander around in the current situation, so he let them follow behind. "How's the homework going?" Renbachian asked. "I have some ideas," Shurgan replied. Renbachian nodded. Perhaps it was because of his upbringing, Shurgan was very thoughtful even though he was young. Compared to those careless aboriginal children, Renbachian had higher expectations for Shurgan. Very quickly, someone brought over an empty mount for them to sit on. Even though Shiwanya wanted to give his saber-toothed tiger to the Empress, this mount was extremely picky, so he gave up after thinking about it. "What are the casualties?" the Empress asked as she sat on her mount. 873. Shiwanya didn't need to ask the others. He knew clearly how many people had died in every battle along the way. Nearly 400 of them died on top of Wu City's walls. Send them back to the mountains, the Empress said. Yes. Is Protector General Shi all right? Renbaqian couldn't help but ask when he saw him spitting out mouthfuls of blood. It's just a minor injury. I'm fine. Shi Huanya grinned as blood trickled down from the corner of his mouth. There's something in the blood you vomited. Renbaqian reminded him. No matter how he looked at it, it seemed like he had vomited out his lungs. I will be fine after a few months of recuperation, Shi Huanya said casually. Renbaqian gave him a thumbs up. Your Majesty, why didn't you inform us before coming out? Shi Huanya couldn't help but ask along the way. I was bored staying here. Now that you are here, there's no need to say any more. The Empress's words made Shi Huanya swallow the rest of his words. As for the rich aroma of food coming from the Empress's body, he didn't even mention it. Protector General Shi, is it just you guys? Renbaqian glanced at the advancing troops, roughly estimated the number of people, and asked. It's enough to have us, Shi Huanya said resolutely. Renbaqian stroked his chin. If talking was useful, he could make all the experts in Tianjin Basin doubt their lives. Not to mention the high-end forces, the Empress only had 1/3 of her strength left, and Shi Huanya had become like this. Just the 2,000 man-wheel cavalrymen facing 500 to 600 earth-wheel experts, more than 1,000 man-wheel experts, and a city full of guards, no matter how he looked at it, they had no chance of winning. In the past, the high-end forces of the Aboriginals had crushed the enemy, but now they were being crushed. Originally, they didn't have the upper hand in terms of numbers and experts. Furthermore, they were besieging a city. Renbaqian didn't have much hope that they would be able to take down Wu City. Unless, he still had dozens of smoke grenades, and he didn't know what would happen if he threw them into the city. Would they come out to fight or flee upon hearing the news? That night, everyone stayed at the foot of Mount Wu. Many of the soldiers who went to look for prey inadvertently entered the location where the battle took place that day and immediately returned with a body full of stench. The main reason was that there was a substance in skunk musk that had an extremely strong adhesion. Furthermore, this substance would release mercaptan when it came into contact with water molecules. Even if the smell on the body was reduced, as long as this substance was still present, it would release mercaptan when the air was humid, which was also that stench. Coincidentally, Tianjin Basin had a humid climate, especially at night. How have you been here these few days? During dinner, the Empress, who had gotten rid of the stench on her body, felt at ease and was finally concerned about other things. Renbaqian understood that the Empress was referring to the people in Tianjin Basin. There's nothing for ordinary people to pay attention to. They can't see too far ahead and can't care that much. Furthermore, their current living conditions aren't considered good. As long as public opinion is well controlled, I believe that they will be able to stabilize and be of use to you. These sects and forces are the source of trouble. As long as we clean them up, use public opinion to stabilize the people, use a strong military force to deter them, and use kindness and might to stabilize Tianjin Basin. The Empress nodded and said, I'll leave this matter to you when we return to Gu City. I'll give you 3 to 6 months. If they have any intention of rebelling again, don't blame me. Initially, she only wanted to give them 3 months because she didn't want to wait too long. However, after thinking about it, 3 months was indeed rather difficult for such a large area, so she relaxed to half a year. Renbaqian nodded. The lives of more than 10 million people were on his shoulders, and this wasn't a light burden. The system in Tianjin Basin had to be changed. He didn't know how far he could go in half a year at most. Since he was just starting, he had to find someone who could take over and carry out his ideas. Shi Huanya was good at killing people, but he couldn't be relied on in this matter. However, it would be much easier if he could subdue some of the experts in the city. Your Majesty, I'm afraid that the Qin nation has sent troops. Renbaqian recalled the news he heard from Su Qing. The Empress responded faintly as if she didn't care. In fact, there wasn't much they could do here without a radio station. Moreover, the Protector General of the Southeast had always concealed his strength, and the Empress had confidence in him. Your Majesty, have you heard of a saying? What? There are as many stars as there are people in the world. Every time a person dies, a star will fall. The more famous and powerful a person is, the brighter the star that belongs to him. I think that the star that belongs to your majesty must be the brightest star in the sky. Rinpoche placed his hands behind his back, leaned back, and looked up at the galaxy in the sky. The Empress looked up at the starry sky and suddenly said, "I want to see a meteor shower." Rinpoche was speechless. This was a little difficult. Not far away, Shiwanya's ears twitched as he said resolutely, "Tomorrow, I will slaughter everyone in Wu City and let your majesty see a meteor shower." Rinpoche glanced at him and thought, "Why are you everywhere? Don't you have any sense of right and wrong? You even talk about your lungs." Chapter 470. The next morning, everyone set off after breakfast and stopped a few kilometers away from the north gate of Wu City. There were already many people watching from the top of the city wall. "Your Majesty, please give the order. I will break into Wu City and take down these rebels." Shiwanya asked for permission to fight in front of the Empress. Rinpoche glanced at him and then at the top of the city wall. No matter how he looked at it, his side was at a disadvantage. After the battle with the Empress, there were only 11 people left. Qingyun's sword, who was the strongest among them, had lost a lot of energy after yesterday's battle. Chang Tian had poured all his energy into his spear and died after using it. Now, there were only 9.5 people who could fight. Lin Xiaola and the other 2 spirit will experts could each hold off 3 people, so it wasn't a big problem. If the Empress were to personally fight, even if she only had 30% of her strength left, she could still suppress the other party in terms of high-level combat power. However, even if more than 2,000 soldiers were at the advanced man-wheel level, the other party had more than 500 earth-wheel experts, which meant that they could fight against 5 of them. Not to mention the others. "I will watch you seize the city from here," the Empress said faintly. Seeing that the 2 had decided to attack the city, Rinpoche didn't say anything else and observed carefully. Following Shiwanya's order, more than 2,000 soldiers got off their mounts and rushed toward Wu City. When they arrived at the bottom of Wu City, the people at the front stopped about 3 meters below the wall, turned around, and used their hands to build a ladder above their heads. The people at the back soared into the air, stepped on their palms, and leaped 7 or 8 meters high. They either directly climbed over the wall or stepped on the wall for support. They climbed over the 8-meter-tall wall. After all, Wu City wasn't a big city, and the wall was only about 8 meters high. It was enough to stop ordinary people, but to stop man-will experts, it was useless. The Aboriginals didn't need any equipment to attack a city, and they could easily climb over a wall that was 8 meters high. If the wall was too high, they could rely on the experts to break the gate with brute force. In the past, when they attacked the wall, there would be a massacre. However, at this time, there was a group of earth-wheel experts on the wall. When the first batch of people climbed over the wall, more than half of them were chopped down and fell from the top of the wall. Following closely behind the first batch of soldiers, the second batch of soldiers jumped onto the city wall like a group of grasshoppers. Relying on their vigor and bravery, they forcefully occupied a small portion of the city wall despite being surrounded by many earth-wheel experts. As groups of soldiers jumped onto the wall, roars and shouts of killing rang out from the top of the wall, and blood spilled down from the top of the wall. Rinpoche carefully observed the situation on the city wall and found that it was slightly better than what he had expected. Although these Aboriginal warriors were 4-way heaven experts and were equivalent to man-will experts, they were much stronger than man-will experts. In addition, the walls were narrow, and the teleportation range wasn't large. In this aspect, the Aboriginals had an advantage when using military combat techniques. Many of the earth-wheel experts on the city wall were at the initial stage of the earth-wheel level. Some of them weren't good at strength but were good at speed. In such a small area, they were at a disadvantage when facing 4 to 5 elite soldiers who had good teamwork. In particular, many of the Aboriginal warriors were slashing at each other. They didn't dodge and would retaliate with a slash of their own, trading injury for injury and life for life. This kind of bravery was something that those earth-wheel experts who lived like princes didn't possess. This kind of desperation was something that they couldn't accept. If they were asked to fight with the Empress, they naturally wouldn't cherish their lives. However, if they were asked to exchange their lives with these ordinary soldiers, everyone would hesitate. In this bloody battlefield, both sides were entangled with each other and were fighting for their lives at this moment. Of course, this was only part of the situation on the battlefield. In many places, 4 to 5 elite soldiers who had good teamwork could only barely resist an earth-will expert. From time to time, someone would be knocked down from the city wall. No matter how brave they were and how good their teamwork was, they were only at the man-will level. The disparity in strength between them and an earth-will expert was too great, and they were completely relying on fighting with their lives. The Aboriginals occupied about a quarter of the lower part of the city wall. In this part of the city wall, they repeatedly fought with their opponents and actually managed to gain a firm foothold for a while. At the bottom of the city wall, the Aboriginals were divided into 3 groups. Lin Xiaola and 2 other spirit will experts were fighting 1 against 3, which was the opposite of the situation on the city wall. Only Shi Wanya stood upright in the distance and watched the killing on the city wall without saying a word. "Your Majesty, what do you think?" After watching for a long time, Rinpoche turned his head to look at the Empress, only to see her frown slightly and remain silent. Both sides fought for a while and only withdrew in the evening. Only half of the soldiers retreated. A full 1,000 people had spilled their blood on the small city wall. The Aboriginals suffered a lot as well. More than half of the 1,000 disciples from various sects were injured or killed, and nearly half of the earth-will experts were injured or killed. However, most of the casualties were from the weaker earth-will experts. On the contrary, the strong earth-will experts were mostly unharmed. It could be said that both sides had suffered heavy losses. Everyone retreated to the foot of Mount Wu. Rinpoche said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, although the Aboriginals are good at fighting one-on-one, the Aboriginals are practitioners who are better at fighting one-on-one. Even though we can restrict their movements on the city wall, we are restricting both sides to a certain range and fighting them head-on. This is very disadvantageous for us. Do you have a good idea?" The Empress looked up at him and hoped that he would say, "Yes, I have a plan." "Your Majesty, I have an idea," Rinpoche said. "Speak." The Empress was in a much better mood after hearing what he said. "Throw a few hundred smoke bombs into the city to force them to come out. If we use military formations to confront them, I think they are no match for us," Rinpoche said. Dozens of smoke bombs were still too few for a city like Wu City. However, if he could get a few hundred of them, it would be enough to spread the fragrance for 5 kilometers around Wu City. It would be refreshing, enjoyable, and memorable. The Empress clenched her fists and felt a little itchy. Even though this was a plan, she really didn't want to use it. The smell really made her feel guilty. If a few hundred smoke bombs were thrown into Wu City, it would be very cruel. Not to mention that they couldn't stay in Wu City, they couldn't stay outside the city either. At that time, a group of experts with a suffocating stench would charge over. That scene would be too beautiful. The smell could be directly emitted from the scene, and she didn't dare to think about it. The Empress called Shi Wanya over and asked, "Is it possible to attack this city?" Shi Wanya nodded and replied, "I will definitely attack this city and present the heads of these rebels to your Majesty." Rinpoche looked at Shi Wanya. From today's situation, Shi Wanya could at most perish together with the other party. In fact, the remaining forces of the other party would become stronger as time passed. Where did he get the confidence to attack the city? "Your Majesty, the winged cavalry is rushing toward Tianjin Basin after resting," Shi Wanya said without Rinpoche asking. Rinpoche then remembered that the winged cavalry had already returned to Dayo before he set off for Tianjin Basin. The winged cavalry were the Empress's personal guards, and they would be wherever the Empress was. Now that the Empress was in the south, the winged cavalry would naturally follow. How long will it take? The Empress didn't say anything else after hearing that the most elite winged cavalry was rushing over. "When I set off, the winged cavalry left Gu City 6 days ago. I estimate that they will definitely arrive in 3 days at most," Shi Wanya said. Chapter 471. Although they were going to wait 3 days before attacking, they didn't do nothing. From the next day onwards, the army would march around Wu City in formation every day. Although there were only slightly more than 1,000 of them, no one dared to underestimate them. "Your Majesty, please take a seat." Renbaqian brought over a wooden chair that still had the aroma of wood. It was made by a few soldiers that he had just found. Although there weren't any nails, mortise and tenon would do. After the Empress sat down, Renbaqian found a man with a loud voice to stand beside him and shouted whatever she said. Then, he sat on the ground and began to recall the words that he had said to persuade them to surrender. "People in the city, listen up. You have been surrounded. The sea of bitterness has no bounds. Repent and you will be saved. Lay down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. Those who confess will be given leniency in prison. Those who resist will be sent home for the new year. If you surrender, you will still have a way out. On account of the goodness of the heavens, Her Majesty has decided to give you a chance and temporarily refrain from using weapons of mass destruction. I hope that you will soon realize that doing so will only lead to death. Only by surrendering can you exchange for a bright future." Everyone in Wu City was speechless. Did this guy want them to surrender or not? There are still mothers and children waiting for you at home. Don't let your loved ones cry because of a moment of happiness. Rebellion may feel good for a moment, but your whole family will be cremated. If you die, someone else will live in your house, spend your money, sleep with your wives, and beat your children. What a tragic story. Within a few minutes, these words were transmitted to the top of the city wall, giving everyone a headache. "Let me go and kill him," someone on the top of the city wall said angrily with a saber hilt in his hand. In a battle between two sides, any means could be used. However, the other party's words were really annoying. In addition, the smell on everyone's body hadn't disappeared, constantly reminding everyone that the guy outside was the culprit. Don't be provoked by him. He is waiting for someone to go out. Someone immediately stopped him. The person who was stopped was furious. He knew that if he went out, he would die, but he couldn't bear it. That fellow's words were really too despicable. Listening to it was really annoying. It was like a little bug buzzing in one's ear, making one want to slap it to death. "It's useless. Just kill them all," Shiwanya said to Renbaqian after a whole morning. He scoffed at Renbaqian's idea of persuading him to surrender. It might be useful. Renbaqian didn't argue with him. He just smiled, got up, and eagerly went to look for the Empress for a meal. Persuading them to surrender was naturally useless now. The Aboriginals had always been using violence to curb violence and killing to stop the war. They had never talked about persuading the other party to surrender. Naturally, the other party wouldn't surrender either. They were hot-blooded and would fight to the death. However, if he revealed his intention to ask them to surrender, perhaps some people would remember it. Of course, it was useless now. After all, Wu City had not been breached. Even if there were people who had such thoughts, they would not show it. However, after the winged cavalry arrived and conquered Wu City, there might really be people who surrendered. After all, there were so many of them. They couldn't all be the kind of tough guys who would raise their heads and say, "I'll be a hero again after 18 years, right?" As long as a small number of people surrendered, it would be very useful in stabilizing Tianjin Basin in the future. In particular, the Earth Wheel experts from the various sects and powers were all well-known figures in Tianjin Basin. Their prestige in the sects and powers they belonged to wasn't low. With their presence, many things would be much easier to handle. In the afternoon, Renbaqian got someone to repeat what he had said in the morning. However, there weren't many people on the city wall this time. They seemed to have noticed that the Aboriginals didn't intend to attack today. There were only 2 or 3 experts on the city wall overlooking this place, followed by a few accompanying disciples. "If we attack now, we will definitely be able to take down the top of the city wall in one fell swoop," Shiwanya said as he looked at the top of the city wall. "They think so too." Renbaqian poured a bucket of cold water on him. On the surface, those experts didn't seem to be on the top of the city wall. However, their movements were extremely fast. Even if they were resting in the city, they would be able to rush to the top of the city wall in a short period of time if a battle broke out. Furthermore, they might be conserving their energy and waiting to attack. In the evening, when the Aboriginals retreated to the foot of Mount Wu, Qing Yun's sword looked at the information that had just been transmitted to him in silence. Dozens of people looked at him from below and waited for him to speak. Many of them still had bloodstains on their bodies. A few days ago, there were still many experts here. All the experts in Tianjing Basin had gathered and were full of lofty aspirations to surround and kill Qi Zixiao before leading the people of Tianjing Basin out of this cage. However, after a few battles, they had lost more than half of their forces, which made everyone feel somewhat sorrowful. "We have lost," Qing Yun's sword said miserably after remaining silent for the time it took for an incense stick to burn. His originally ashen face became even more ashen. "The outcome isn't decided yet." Qing Yun's sword, as the person in charge this time, "How can you say such demoralizing words?" Someone immediately reprimanded him. The person who retorted was an elder from a major sect. Their supreme elder had died in the battle with the Empress, and most of the experts in the sect had died in the battle yesterday. At this moment, he was filled with blood because he wanted revenge. How could he listen to such words? Elder Su is right. The outcome isn't decided yet. The other party only has about 1,000 people, and we have so many experts. Why should we be afraid of them? Someone immediately echoed. If we admit defeat like this, how can we face those who died in the battle? After these two bloody battles, which sect or power didn't have people who died in the battle? Their close friends had died in the battle, and they had the ambition to break out of this cage for decades. How could they admit defeat so easily? Qing Yun's sword closed his eyes in silence and placed the slip of paper on the table beside him. Immediately, someone went forward to pick it up. After taking a look, his face immediately changed, and he passed it to the next person. "The Wing Cavalry are here." A voice full of despair immediately silenced the hall. There were two kinds of armies in the world, the Aboriginals and the other armies. The Aboriginals had two kinds of armies, the winged cavalry and the other armies. One was made up of cavalry that had reached the Kismet heaven level, and the other was made up of earthwheel experts. An army of more than 1,000 soldiers was equivalent to an entire protectorate. "Aren't they in Great Xia?" Someone said hoarsely. "They are already here. They are 100 kilometers away." "Why did you only get the news now?" someone asked in a hoarse voice. "The entire residence of the warlord of Longzhou City is dead, and the entire city is under the control of the Protectorate of the South. The news came from Pingling City. They should be 150 kilometers away now and will arrive tomorrow," Qing Yun's sword said with his eyes closed. "Withdraw from Wu City and return to your sections. The Northern Alliance, Southern Metropolis, and Green Bellflower will immediately mobilize their troops. All the sects will bring their disciples to join the army," someone immediately said. Previously, their objective was to surround and kill Qi Zixiao. After her death, Deyo was without a leader, and there were strong enemies outside. Although Tianjing Basin would receive revenge, it was just the Protectorate of the South. Even if Deyo wanted to mobilize more troops, they were powerless. In fact, if a war broke out between multiple parties, Deyo would collapse in one fell swoop. At this point, it was obvious that they had already failed. In that case, they could only mobilize their troops immediately and fight the Aboriginals. As soon as he said this, everyone immediately responded, and the hall immediately became noisy. After all, the winged cavalry was about to arrive. If they continued to defend Wu City, they would be courting death. The final outcome would be to perish together with the city. If they mobilized their troops now, they still had a chance. "Let's do it this way," Qing Yun's sword said with his eyes closed. "Principal Ren, an old friend is here to see you. Please come out for a chat." A clear voice came from afar. Ren Baqian was being hung on a tree branch by the Empress. Just now, when the two of them played mahjong, the Empress, who had successfully crushed Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, was being plastered like a mummy by Ren Baqian. Upon hearing this voice, Ren Baqian immediately became spirited and said, quickly put me down. You have a lot of old friends. The empress was under the tree with her face plastered with paper slips. As an empress, she still had a basic moral outlook. Even though Renbaqian was hung on the tree, she didn't remove the paper slips. It's an envoy sent by Great Xia to contact everyone in Tianjing Basin to mobilize their troops. Oh? Behead him then. Someone come. Your Majesty, wait a moment. I made an agreement with him. He must have something important to do. Renbaqian quickly shouted. After a while, Renbaqian, who was followed by a spirit will expert, saw Su Qing standing on a rock. Sir Ren, you deceived me so badly. I just saved your life. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.